week's window, and something inside of me gave me a surge of hope. So I pushed harder, and I ran as fast as I could. But all that was lost when I got to the porch, and I heard a deafening screech. I heard the dreadful sound of wind blowing from huge wings. I slammed right into the door, not even slowing down. I began to pound on their front door, screaming, "Let me in! Help!" Suddenly, Jake's father yanks open the door, and the creature is nowhere to be seen. I'm looking behind me, making sure the thing isn't there, and I hear Jake's father say, "What's the matter, boy? You're freaking us out."
I saw a spooky
Jake's
monster.
dad is a very genuinely nice man, but I stood there completely appalled. I couldn't speak. Eventually, I got settled in and told my friend what I had seen, but as you would expect, no one would believe me. My mom picked me up in the morning the next day. I told her as well, but I don't think she believes me either. I don't care what anybody says. I just know what I saw was true. Cryptids or unknown creatures are not some nutjob's fantasy. Cryptids always have been and will be a thing. They are simply undiscovered creatures. I mean, most animals have been one before. With animals changing and adapting constantly, new species will pop up, and therefore new cryptids will always be around. So no matter how many cameras and people are watching, there will always be creepy critters sneaking about. It's just the ones that breathe on you in your sleep that you need to worry about. Good night. Be sure to like, share,
Breathe on you in
comment,
your
and
sleep.
subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your scary stories today. We might even feature them in a future video. Just go to darknessprevails.org. Thanks. When did serve and protect become disturb and horrify? This world is a strange one.
Like I'm a police.
Humans naturally trust authority figures. All it takes is a uniform and a badge. Immediately, our instincts will tell us that those people are looking out for us. But police are all people like us. They are riddled with imperfections, some more than others. So whether you're an officer of the law with a horrific experience, or you've encountered a police officer that just wasn't right, these allegedly true stories will show us that the instinct to respect those in uniform might just get us killed. Buckle up. This will be a wild ride. Plus, you know, it's the law. But first, if you've got a story about strange creature sightings or creepy hitchhikers, be sure to send your story to us at darknessprevails.org. I might just read it in a future video. Now, I thought handcuffs were supposed to be sexy.
Kinky.
Number 1. Speeding. Submitted by Rose. Before I begin my story, I need to give a fair warning that this is only what I remember and how I feel. These events are 100% unfabricated by anything besides perhaps my bias of these supposed events. Memory can get a little fuzzy at times. And I do hope that you'll take into consideration what I'm about to tell you. So let me start by saying that I'm not a very good driver. Yeah, sure, the whole women can't drive stereotype isn't lost on me whenever I get on the highway, but it's relevant to the story. I've been driving more or less for 5 years, ever since I was 14. I kind of went into the opposite direction of skill, where I started out pretty good for my age, but with experience I seem to be getting worse and worse.
Oh, that's
so I
interesting.
found a simple solution. I moved to the city, and I tried to keep driving to a minimum. That is, until recently. Losing
bro.
someone you were once close to is one of the worst feelings imaginable, especially when you hadn't really been in good contact for a few years. Mom, that my dad had passed. I felt my heart swell and fall into my stomach. Apparently, he had been having heart complications, and they didn't want me to know about it, and finally he had just given in. When I asked my mom, "We're not sure, probably next Sunday. You're going to have to drive down for it," she informed me. After I hung up, I quickly looked over my finances to see if maybe there was a way I could afford a plane ticket. Of course, as a young adult, I wasn't very frugal, and I realized soon enough that my only option was to drive. About 2 days after I got the call about my dad, I requested time off for work and class, packed up my belongings, and prepared myself to set out for my parents' home. Although they didn't live too far away, only a 5-hour drive, I still felt nervous as soon as I had left the city traffic and was on the freeway. Whenever a truck would pass by, I'd feel my body tense up in fear of either him or myself screwing up. Luckily, nothing like that happened. It was getting dark already, as I had left the city at about 5 p.m. For some reason, I've always enjoyed driving at night. I don't know why, but it made me feel more secure.
I like driving in
Maybe it's because there are less people out, or because I like the whole aesthetic of driving at night. But either way, it provided some comfort, as I quickly realized the sun was sinking down into the trees, faster and faster. I turned up the music, Billy Joel no less, and I began to adjust myself into the groove of the road. Without realizing it though, I had sped up a considerable amount, and it wasn't even 20 minutes later that a police officer had turned on his lights behind me. Instantly, my hands were shaking and sweating, so I slowed down and merged over into the shoulder of the road before stopping my car completely. In the rear-view mirror of my car, I saw the shadow of the officer. The sight of this man was staggering. He must have been nearly 7 feet tall, probably weighing somewhere in the 200s, approaching my car fast, hands in his pockets. Right away, I was very intimidated. I braced myself for a lecture after having gotten over his awesome stature. He tapped on my window, and I rolled it down. Now that he was closer to my car, I was able to get a better look at him. His face was hard and angry, although his expression did not seem to match. He had beady little eyes and a hooked nose, and almost no eyebrows. He also had thin lips, and his head was covered in white, greasy hair. It was long and hung down around his shoulders. He must have been the bad cop. "Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" he asked, leaning against the car and pushing his face through my window, so that I could smell his disgusting breath. His voice had a slight southern twang to it, something odd for being this far up north. No, sorry, it won't happen again," I sputtered, backing myself up a little bit so I didn't have to be so close to his face. "Well, how can I know that for sure?" His voice seemed to mock me, sticking through the air. I locked eyes with him. I would have to play the sympathy card. "Look, officer," I paused, looking for a name tag that didn't seem to be there. I'm just on my way to a funeral, for my dad." "Aw, well ain't that a shame," he said. "Tell you what, you come back with me to my car so I can write a ticket and we'll call it a night." My blood froze. I felt chills go down my spine.
I don't want to go in a car.
Something felt off. "Back to your car?" I asked.
Yeah, this isn't a place I would think to do.
Write the ticket here?
Yeah, why are we doing
This wasn't the first time I had been pulled over for speeding, and from my personal experience, usually the police officer would write the ticket here, push it through the window, and send me off.
Yeah, I don't know why I'd want you to go in the car.
He didn't even ask me for my
license
or registration. Well, I would, but I left my stuff back in the car, and I wouldn't want to backtrack all the way over here. You understand that, don't you?
No, do it.
He smiled this crooked, yellow-toothed smile. His eyes looked dead, and seemed to be avoiding eye contact with mine.
Not suspicious meter.
"No, I don't." My voice dropped. I felt my hand search around the side of the door for the lock. "Let's be reasonable now. Disobeying an officer is a violation of the law, miss." He paused. "I didn't ask to see your license yet, did I? My apologies. I'm a little new on the job. May I see it?" I awkwardly kept one hand searching for the lock, while I turned and attempted to look like I was shuffling through my purse. My mind was swimming in panic. I did not know how to defend myself in this situation, and I certainly didn't know what to do in a situation like this. What if he was just a new officer? Maybe I was just overreacting. In one swift motion, I locked my car door the moment I handed him the ID. "Here," I said, rather loudly, hoping he would not hear the sound of the little click in my car. "Thank you." He smiled, then stared at my license for almost too long. It had been almost a minute of awkward silence before he handed it back to me with a nod. "Alright then, let's head back to my car so I can write your ticket." As he was talking, he was cut off by the sound of his car honking behind us. He turned in an almost panicked state, looking back at his car. I strained my neck to look in my rearview mirror, and my heart stopped, as I saw what looked like the shadow of another man, most likely a police officer, slamming his head into the horn repeatedly.
What?
I looked back at the officer
Why is he slamming his head on
who
the
had
horn?
seemingly already been looking at me.
Is he a mental patient?
Before I gave myself time to think, my hands fiddled with the car keys as I tried to start the car again.
Ow.
My engine roared to life, thank God, and right before I slammed on my pedal, I felt a hand grab onto my hair and yank my head back, and hard, out of the window. I screamed and sped the car up, feeling his hand release his tight grip on me. As I merged back onto the road, I rolled up my windows and sped down the freeway, weaving in and out of cars in an attempt to put some space between me and that supposed police officer.
Yeah, I already was warning bells by the hands in his pocket thing. I was like, that's not normal.
I decided to slow down to avoid any real arrests. The rest of the drive, about 2 hours more,
at least
went
try to
by
look
smoothly.
professional, dude.
When I got to my parents' house, I told my mom everything, and she called the police. Apparently, the man was an
insane asylum warden?
escaped convict from southern Georgia who had made his way up the country to escape. He was armed and dangerous. This happened only a few weeks ago. Things have been quiet, but I can't get one thing out of my head. He stared at my ID. He knows
your name.
What I look like, my age, even where I live. He would easily be able to find me if he wanted to. And honestly, why wouldn't he want to? I gave the police a lead to where he might be going. I haven't been able to sleep in days. I haven't even left my apartment. But sometimes at night, I swear I can hear footsteps outside of my apartment door. Heavy, angry footsteps.
Maybe you should leave? Like, go to your mom or something. Goodness gracious.
They never go any further than a few steps, and they never go too near my door. But I know they're there. Number 2. The Hills Have Eyes. Submitted by Southern Proby. In college, I was a criminal justice major, but this incident made me change my major and quit my job as a probation officer. I worked for the Juvenile Justice Department, as I said before, a probation officer, in the southern United States. As a probation officer for juveniles, you have to make frequent field visits to schools, to homes, to places of business. Most of the time, the visits were uneventful, but any time I went on a field visit, it was always a little unnerving, especially to people's houses. As a juvenile probation officer, you are not allowed to carry a weapon, and quite often you could get into some sticky situations. So we used a group text system to check in, and to let our fellow officers know if we were in danger or needing assistance. Once you checked in, there was another check-in every 30 to 40 minutes.
Oh, cool.
If you needed help, you would use the name Aunt May, as in Mayday. The last home
Aunt
visit
May.
that I went to was in a very rural area. It was a hot summer day, and it was about noonish. The area was an economically depressed area, and many of the homes were either boarded up and vacant or in a dilapidated state. I arrived at the house, honestly one of the better-looking houses in the area. I sent my check-in text to my office and knocked on the door, announcing that I was from the Juvenile Justice Department, and I flashed my badge. So if someone was looking through the window or door, they would see that I was really a police or probation officer. Even though the kid on probation was supposed to be at home, no one answered the door at first, so I walked back towards my car. As I got back to my car, I saw the front door open, and an enormous man, about 6'9", my uncle's 6'6", and this guy easily towered over him, comes out onto the porch and calls out to me. He was unkempt and dirty looking, and gaunt, but muscular at the same time. My first thought was that this guy looked like a meth head. Even though I'm a man, I won't lie. This guy was physically intimidating. I sheepishly approached and said that I was from the Juvenile Justice Department, and that I was there to see such and such, showing him my badge. He waved me inside and called the child to the living room. The kid was about 14 years old. He was a slightly shorter version of this man, who must have been his dad. He must have been about 6'5" or 7, gaunt still, and muscular and dirty. So I talked to the kid, mostly small talk, asking him about what he was doing for the summer. I also inquired about any other charges or anything like that that I would need to know about. These visits usually take about half an hour or so. So about half an hour later, I'm wrapping up the visit and getting ready to leave. Now, this is where it gets weird. So Dad is standing next to the door as I'm getting ready to leave, and he asked me if that's all. I said yes, and I said that I would be in touch to schedule an office visit within the next 3 weeks. The man then asks me, "Since you're already here, do you want to meet the rest of the family?" As I said, Dad was intimidating, but I said something to the effect of no. I had to get back to the office, or go to another home or something like that. So the man walks to the back door and calls in the rest of the family
I said no.
Right at this time, I get a check-in text. Just as I saw 3 other people that looked like they could be Dad's clones walk inside the house. I sent the following text. "Aunt May, I'm trying to head out to see you. Call me right back." And I'll explain. I kid you not, these guys encircled me, and they all had eyes that narrowed and just glared at me. I really felt like a mouse being circled by a group of hungry cats. It was a very much predator-prey feel. Thank you God, Aunt May called me at that moment. I basically flat-footed past them saying that my aunt was calling and I had to take it, that I would be right back. I brushed past the father to let myself out of the house. I think I touched the ground twice as I ran to my car. As I left, I saw the dad standing in the doorway, and I just floored it out of there. I must have been going 70 in a residential area. I got out of there and got to the next town. I stopped at a fast food place and just tried to calm down. I must have looked bent out of shape, because the manager actually came over to check on me. I composed myself, and I drove back to the Juvenile Justice Department. On the way back, I realized that I left my case notes and materials back at that house. Before I did anything, I told my boss about the incident, and he basically told me that I was blowing the whole thing out of proportion, and to go back to get my materials from the house and to apologize to that family. I told him in no uncertain terms to pleasure himself rectally with those case files, because I was not going back to that place ever again. That group of men could have killed me at any second. Surrounding me like that, it was the most obvious threat I'd ever seen.
And then this guy's like, "Oh no, it's normal." It's like, what kind of household you live in?
Number 3. Fake cops tried to break in. Submitted by Hindo. To begin, I'm a 20-year-old man from Alabama. At the time of this story, I was about 12 or 13. My parents own a small bus and diesel shop that they run on the same property our house is on. It's basically in our yard, but with some distance separating the business and the house. They have anywhere between 12 to 20 people working for them at any time, mostly older retired people who just get bored sitting at home. They drive school bus routes for them a couple of hours of the day. But we lived in a not-so-great part of town. I'm talking meth heads and just plain weird types of people walking the streets constantly. It's a small town and people know each other, so everyone knew that my family were big hunters. And big hunters meant lots of guns in our house, so generally we were left alone. That being said, if we were ever disturbed at home, people mostly came to the door that led into the driveway, as the door to the living room that looked out towards the road was behind a locked gate. For the most part, that door was only used by us when we went into our yard to play or to take the dogs out. One night, my dad and I, who I'll note is an older man by regular standards, were in our living room watching a movie. My mother came home from a short trip, and she prepared for bed around 11 that night. My dad shortly followed, telling me to finish the movie and get to bed. Doing as I was told, I did finish the movie, but I didn't go to bed like I was supposed to, at least not in my bedroom. I watched TV for a few minutes after the movie went off, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep on our couch. It must have been 3 in the morning when I woke up to the sound of knocking on the door in our living room. Like I said before, this was strange, being that usually when someone did knock on our door, it was the other door they used, not the one behind the locked gate.
Yeah,
It was even more strange because it was 3 in the morning. Who could possibly be at our house at 3 and knock on the door?
Apparently police.
They kept knocking more and more. 5 quick knocks followed by a quick pause, then 5 more fast knocks. This continued for about 3 minutes, before I moved my head to see that they had a freaking flashlight aimed through the glass on the door, pointed right at me. Then I heard 2 voices beyond the door. "Hey, come over here.
Hey,
Open the door."
you can't
I
do
wasn't
that.
in my right state of mind, because I got up sleepily and walked over to the door. They turned off the flashlight and started trying to talk to me.
Clearly
The
you're not in the right state
conversation
of
went
mind.
something like this. Someone on the left said, "Open the door. We need to speak with your parents." I replied, "Who are you?
Yeah, who
What
are
do you
you?
want?"
And no, you can't.
The guy on the right, who I'll note had the creepier, raspy voice, said, "We're the police. You need to let us in."
No, you
What
don't.
do you need exactly? I was cut off, though, by the guy on the right again, who seemed to be getting annoyed. "Open the door." I was taken aback by this random guy shouting at me. Like
thanks.
opening the door for strangers in the middle of the night was something a kid should do, cops or not. I went to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them about these men outside.
Yeah.
My mom followed me to the door, while my dad got his gun out of the drawer
Oh,
by the
Dad's
bed.
not taking any shit.
My mom walked up to the door and flicked on the switch of the light outside. Looking back, I should have done that too, so I could have gotten a better look at them.
Yeah,
She
you're
looked through the glass
asleep.
on the door and said, "Who are you telling my son to open up the door at this hour?" "We're the police, ma'am. Open up."
No.
She replied to the man on the left, "You're not
Where's
in
your-
uniform and I don't see any badges. Our badges are in the squad car in the driveway. But
Show
you
it.
need to open up now. It's an emergency." I hadn't even thought about what they were wearing. Because of my height at the time, about 5 feet, I could only see
Well,
the
good
top
thing you
part of their
deferred to your
bust.
parents.
One of the men was wearing a dirty white t-shirt and a dark-colored coat. The other had on a gray hoodie.
Not even in
I could
uniform.
only barely get a look of their faces because of the lighting. But I know the guy on the right had the typical scraggly beard, and the guy on the left was wearing glasses and seemed to be clean-cut. The guy mentioning his squad car made me realize I hadn't even seen what they were driving.
Yeah, it was your squad
But I
car.
should probably find out, just in case I had to tell the police about it later. So I looked out the window in our living room
Oh,
to see a
kid already
black,
knows.
early 2000s model Chevy
Kid knows
Tahoe.
they're not police.
While this could be mistaken
Nice.
for a police car by someone, I wasn't fooled. It had no marking indicating it was a police vehicle, and the usual bright blue lights that seemed to cover the car were instead a single dim blue light. And also the guy said squad car, yet obviously they were driving an SUV. I've always wanted to be a cop, so I knew some of the terminology, and I know you don't call a Tahoe a squad car. You also never leave your badge in the vehicle, especially on police business, and if it came down to it, you could just simply walk back to the vehicle and grab it. So I was sure by then that these people weren't real cops. They had something sinister in mind. At this point, the 2 guys are shouting at my mom to open the door. They were banging excessively hard on the locked glass door that was on the outside, while we were behind the thick wooden door on the inside. My mom called up for my dad, and they said that they would use force if they had to. And then they held up a double-barrel shotgun, and that's when things got scary. My mom grabbed my hand and we ran to the hallway on the other side of the living room. My dad met us in the hallway, and my mom said that they had a gun. I could hear panic in her voice like never before.
Dad's got a
It's
rifle,
one thing
son.
when you have a gun to protect yourself. It's another when the enemy has a gun as well. Any random shot could mean the end of my life, or my parents. I remember being scared. I felt tears form in my eyes. I looked up at my mother, asking her what was going to happen, if we were going to be okay. She squeezed me tight, and she said, of course. But I wasn't sure if I believed her. That was the most terrifying
Well, then don't
part.
ask.
My dad had his 9mm pistol at the ready, aiming it at the door from the hallway, using the hallway as cover. He's former military and has experience in combat situations. My dad shouted to them, "Back away from the door and drop your weapon." And then the guy on the right said, "Open the door now, or we'll use force." My mom began to explain to
No.
my dad that they were saying they were cops, that there were only 2 of them.
Cops
He told
don't
her
have
to call
rifles.
911 immediately. She did, and my dad let these guys know that the police, the real police, were on their way. This must have made them mad, because right after that, I heard the glass door shatter. It was so loud that I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Wrapped up in my mom's embrace, I could feel her jump the moment I did. It was at that point that I realized something. The glass door was locked, but now it was shattered and useless. But the wooden door wasn't. It
Look,
only
close
had
the
the
door.
chain across the top, and that was not enough. I peeked around the corner curiously to get a view of the situation, and I could see one of the men putting his arm through the open part of the door, trying to get the chain unhooked. My dad kept warning him to stop, but he didn't.
Crush his
and my
arm.
dad started to open fire. 3 loud gunshots rang out, all while my mother was still on the phone with one hand with the dispatcher and trying to hold me with the other. She told me to get there as soon as they could. They did, faster than I thought police would show up. But these guys were already gone. My dad had fired at the door and hit it twice,
Oof.
and he was sure that he hit the guy's arm once. He really just skimmed it, but it was enough to make it hurt. It worked, and they ran back to their Tahoe and sped off. We were lucky. We filed a police report. The cops said that they would look into it. But as we didn't have much information from it being so dark, they didn't have much to go on. The most they had was a description of the vehicle, being a black Tahoe, but this was a very popular vehicle and color around the area. But they were able to take the man's blood as evidence that was on the door,
Oh.
and they took pictures of the broken door itself. But they told us that more than likely they couldn't do anything with the blood. If they tested the blood, it would only bring back a person's name or ID if the person was in the system for committing a crime before. And apparently they hadn't. Luckily for us, they did keep an actual squad car around our house for the next week.
Cool.
But all of this, until they're caught, and maybe not even after that, it has made my family lose security in our home and in each other. There were many sleepless nights after that, and there will always be ongoing nightmares. Creepy fake cops, let's not meet again.
What do you mean by in each other? I'm pretty sure you guys were pretty safe on your own.
And number
Hey,
4.
police.
Gruesome police encounter. Submitted
Surprising.
by Angel A. I live in the Philippines, and this happened when I was 17 years old. It was 2 a.m. when I received a call from my aunt. She said that my grandmother was rushed to the hospital, and I needed to come quickly. I rushed to get on my motorcycle. When I was speeding down the highway, I saw blue and red lights flashing in the distance, so immediately I made a turn.
Yeah, this is
But
suspicious.
as I'm
because
passing
police
this
are
dark
supposed to be,
portion
like,
of the highway, a
uh,
flashing
police,
light
blah,
and a
blah,
laser
blah,
was
extra
blurring my
angry
vision,
yelling,
so I
not
quickly
quiet,
pulled the
like,
brakes. Then I saw a
talk to your
police
parents.
officer in the dark
Ah.
flashing his light in my face while his rifle was pointing towards my head. At that point, I'm literally shaking. Then he yelled at me to get on the ground. Not once did
Not
he ask for my
suspicious.
license or anything like that.
Not
He
suspicious.
just grabbed my head and forcefully shoved me to the ground. I kept trying to tell him that I had my license with me and my motorcycle registration. I even had my complete riding gear with me.
And then he steals
But
your
still,
car.
he handcuffed me instead. At the very most, I had just been speeding. But why did he put me in handcuffs?
Because he's not
I
a real
begged
police
him to
officer.
tell me what I did wrong, and he never responded. Not once. My mind and heart were racing. I didn't know what he was going to do with me. He dragged me into an unmarked vehicle that looked very old and shabby. When I was sitting in the van thinking about what was going to happen to me, I heard another police vehicle pull up, with radio chatter inside of it. Apparently, they were responding to a call about something happening just a few blocks down. It is so close to where we are that we can hear someone crying and begging for help in the distance. I was already scared before, but now I was utterly terrified. I had no idea what was going down outside.
Yeah.
I could hear what sounded like a man begging for help. In this weird old van, there was no protective cage like you would expect in a police vehicle. So I shifted around in my handcuffs, and I walked up to behind the driver's seat. That way I could see what was going on outside through the windows. I could see the man that was pleading for help. Then the man just broke down onto the ground, so the cops outside called an ambulance. Before the ambulance came, the man pointed in the direction of another person. I could see the officers raise their guns toward him, shouting commands, probably telling him to stay back. As this area was dark, one of the policemen flashed his light onto the man, and what I saw truly disturbed me.
What?
It looked to be just a teenage boy, maybe 15 years old tops. His stomach was slashed open, and there was blood spilling out onto the ground below. He cradled the wound in his arms, trying to stumble over to the police. I felt nauseated just seeing this. Finally, the ambulance arrived. They tried to save the boy's life, but I don't know if he made it. The officers searched the house that the boy was said to be slashed at. Apparently, they found a lot of drugs there. They arrested several people who apparently were all armed with knives, one of them being the man that had cut open the boy. All of this happened in front of me while I was just sitting there in the van, still shaking and terrified. Suddenly, the doors to the van opened up, and another cop shined his flashlight into my face. He saw me in handcuffs, then asked me, "What are you doing here, son?" I nervously answered him,
by some police officer.
"One of your guys pulled me over and arrested me, sir." The officer gave me a confused look, then asked me,
"He was a police officer,
What's the name of this officer?" I answered him with a shaking voice. "I don't know. He caught me on the dark portion of the highway, and his light was blurring my vision. I did not see his name, but he pointed a rifle right at my head." At this, the cop looked surprised. He stated, "We don't have any officers assigned to this area." My heart sank upon hearing what the officer had said. After everything had went down, and this situation was finally on the news, I realized I was almost abducted and used as a hostage when a drug deal went bad. Someone was trying to take me and use me as a bargaining chip when they tried to escape, just in case they got caught, and who knows what they would have done to me. Getting pulled over or arrested must be scary enough. Getting caught doing something you weren't supposed to, it's a nauseating feeling. But what happens when you've done nothing wrong, and you suddenly see those lights in your rearview mirror at night? When you roll down your window and never lock your door because you think it's a cop coming to your window? When the news reports air the next day, covering the story of a mangled body found on the road? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your strange creature sightings and creepy hitchhiker stories soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks. They walk in the skin of others, looking for their next victims. This world is a strange one. Once believed to be witch doctors who use the skin of various animals to shapeshift and harm people, skinwalkers in modern times have become something else. You may have seen a skinwalker if you've encountered a beast who mimics human sounds, a creature that doesn't look right, or an animal that isn't entirely one animal. Sightings of these terrifying creatures vary wildly, but one thing remains the same. They are lethal. Skinwalkers want to hurt people. They either see us as prey or insects, and you do not want to end up in their line of sight. So get ready for some allegedly real sightings of skinwalker encounters. But first, have you had a terrifying experience at an airport? And I'm not talking about those oh so exciting full cavity searches. If you've got a scary airport experience to share with us, be sure to send it over at darknessprevails.org. It might end up in a future video. Thanks. Anyway, does this human skin make me look fat?
Thought he was a skinwalker the whole time.
Number 1. Encounter with a Skinwalker. Submitted by Stephen E. This all happened one day when I went to spend the day with one of my friends. We'll call him David. David is one of my closest friends and has been for the past 7 or 8 years. We grew up in church together and would always beg our parents to let us go to each other's houses after our Sunday services. But that all changed about a couple of years ago.
But me and David aren't friends anymore. He was a skinwalker.
David was having a sleepover for his 9th birthday, and I was invited.
Well, I hope so.
Now, before I begin this story, I would like to explain the layout of his property, which will be important further into this story. His house is set on a flat level field, and it's about a quarter mile from the nearest house. The backyard is very wide and stretches all the way to the tree line behind the house. They had a swing set for his younger brother set up just a few meters away from the tree line. I arrived at his house at about 4 o'clock. The party did not start until about 4:30, so I was a bit early. He and I decided to go outside to shoot his BB gun to wait for the others to arrive. He He dragged an old barrel out from his father's tool shed. Then we put 4 empty cans on top of the barrel and had at it. We were outside for about half an hour, and we soon saw that other people were arriving, so we thought we would head inside. It was a great time, and before we knew it, we were all passed out. That night, though, I woke up around 12, and I did not know what woke me up. I was confused, as it was still dark out. I just assumed it was my instinct to get up and use the bathroom, but I didn't really have to go that bad. I decided to go downstairs and grab a drink of water, since I was really thirsty. Besides, maybe that's what woke me up. I got a glass of water and began to head back upstairs, when I noticed the slightest movement outside of the kitchen window. I brushed it off, though. I assumed it was a cat or something, maybe an animal of the night. But I continued to head back upstairs.
I'd be like, moth?
When I got back upstairs, I opened the bedroom door, and immediately I noticed that David was standing right in front of his bedroom window.
David, what are you doing?
I asked him, "Is everything all right?" But there was no response.
What are you doing, Dave?
I was a bit weirded out by this.
Dave.
So I slowly walked backwards and shut the door. I
Nope.
turned my head to the right and
Nope.
down the hallway, and I noticed the bathroom light was on. I walked down the hallway and knocked on the door. From the other side, I heard someone say,
Dave?
"Yes?"
Dave?
And it was David's voice.
Hey, Dave.
This
Why
instantly freaked
are you
me out,
us next to your
because there was no
bedroom window?
possible way he could have gotten from the bedroom to the bathroom in that amount of time
Unless
without
he's a
me
witch!
seeing him.
Unless he
So I asked
flash-stepped.
him, I thought you were in your room." He replied, "No, I've been in here the whole time you were downstairs."
Yeah.
I waited for him to get out. After that, I was
Like, I
not
don't
about
know
to
your
go
witchcraft,
anywhere
Dave.
alone. I began to explain to him everything that had happened, and I think he was as freaked out as I was. So he and I decided to go downstairs and watch TV, since his other friends were asleep and we did not want to wake them. We watched some late-night episodes of Fresh Prince and
Fresh
just
Prince
chilled
of Bel-Air!
downstairs for the time being. I was just about to fall asleep again when I heard a thud coming from the window directly behind me facing the backyard. At that moment, I was hesitant to turn around and see what was there. I did, though, but I saw nothing. Just the dark tree line and the moon shining on all the tall pines and bright green grass outside. Honestly, I just knew
That's pretty
something was
spooky.
off. I woke up David, and I asked him if he would go outside with me to investigate the noise I heard.
Help.
He agreed,
Thanks,
though
Dave.
hesitantly, and we both walked quietly to the patio in the back where the noise had been coming from. We didn't go all the way out, due to the fact that it was so dark and we had no flashlights with us. We didn't see
Right.
anything out of the ordinary, but I soon noticed a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, just standing there staring at us.
Hi,
I
beautiful.
could very well make out their silhouette due to the moon shining behind it. I was more than scared by this, so I pushed David to go back inside.
David, get back
We
in the
both
house.
stood at the glass door watching this thing standing there. He and I both could feel the air become very dreadful, and we smelled the worst smell you could possibly imagine.
The smell of rotting
It
flesh.
suddenly surrounded us and smelled of rotten eggs and burnt flesh, but
Not
much
that you
stronger.
should know what that
I
smells
could
like,
see this
actually.
figure start moving towards us, but in the most bizarre way. It almost looked like a drunk person walking, but at a steady pace,
Zombie!
almost in rhythmic form.
Zombie!
Right, left.
Oh my god, he's doing a
As
dance.
they got closer,
Zombie
we could
dance.
slowly start making out facial features. Honestly, I wish I had never seen it, because it was the most horrific and disgusting thing I've ever seen. And it was beyond human.
Everyone
Well,
expects
at least the face looked
Wendigo, but
human.
it's actually
But
a
beyond
zombie.
that, the head looked like a goat. It had hooves and
Okay.
antlers like you would
That's
see on
a
a
weird
buck,
zombie.
and it gave off such an evil vibe that I could barely look at it. It
Evil
didn't
zombie.
take long for David and I to book it back upstairs, screaming like little girls and waking everyone
Oh,
up.
hey, look,
We
10,000.
told everyone what we saw when they began to ask, but our parents were not as impressed. Everyone else, though, believed us. To this day, I still believe it was a skinwalker. But every time I tell the story to someone, they convince me it was just my imagination.
Oh, of course they
But I know
do.
for a fact
'Cause
that
they're
it
in denial.
wasn't. And I know what me and David saw that night was real. To this day, when I ask David about it, he gets this cold sweat and becomes extremely nervous, exactly like I do, every time I think back on that moment.
Well, yeah, that's normal. Almost 30.
Number 2. My experience with skinwalkers. Submitted by Anonymous. This happened around 2 years ago during the summer. I had stayed with my uncle due to family reasons. He was very into our heritage, as he was a Native American and all.
And you
We
want
had
to be proud of
stayed near
heritage,
a
yeah.
reservation. I think it was about 3 miles away from his house. He lived in North Carolina, where he owned a bit of land. The natives had been hosting
Yay.
a sort of festival. It was to spread their beliefs about the conservation of the forest used as farmlands. One day I asked him about it, thinking it would be a fun way to bond with each other. And we went. Though the whole time I was there, I felt like I was being watched. Even up to a week after the festival, I could not shake the feeling of being watched, no matter what I did. Late one night, we
Okay,
were out
music,
driving
please.
in my uncle's old Ford truck. We
Please,
were on a back
music.
road next to the reservation,
Oh,
and of
that's
course
scary,
there
right?
were no streetlights. We were on the edge of a big forest. Soon we saw what looked like a deer in the road. It jumped out of the way quickly, so we never saw exactly what it was. Oddly enough, though,
Probably
my
a deer.
uncle, with a very worried look on his face, stopped the truck.
What?
He stared off into the woods, trying to get a good look at whatever it was.
Why would you want to get a good look
A
at it?
minute or so
If it's a
later,
thingy, then
something
you want to see
heavy
it, don't
landed
you?
in the bed of our truck,
Why do you want to see
and
it?
it weighed the car down and shook it. My first reaction, as anyone would
Ah,
do,
don't look at it.
was to turn my head and see what was back there. But my uncle
Yay.
wouldn't let me. He pushed my head down so that I would not be able to look up, and then he sped off. My head faced the floor of the
Uncle.
vehicle, but I could hear the noises in the bed of the truck move to the roof, and I could hear scratching and screeching noises. It was easily the most chilling sound I've ever heard. Eventually, after about 10 minutes, whatever it was jumped out of the bed. I could tell, because when the weight was lifted, the truck bounced back up,
Oh, that's
and the
heavy.
truck drove a bit easier. Whatever was back there must have been really heavy. Eventually, back at the house, I asked my uncle what had happened, and he explained to me, in a very solemn voice, that it was indeed a skinwalker. He had forced my head down because looking into their eyes meant certain death. And let's just say it was a secret we kept between us,
Ah,
and I now
skinwalkers
share
OP.
this secret
Please
with
nerf.
you. Number 3.
What, to not look at them? All right.
Skinwalker. Submitted by Tyler M. My first sighting was as a child, when I was about 5 years old. My mother talked about her ancestors who were of Sioux blood, and she used to tell me stories. I was a child, and they were just stories to me, so never once did I assume they were real. One day, my mom and dad took me and my half-brother to a graveyard. In the center was a statue of an Indian chief. It was very large and old.
Oh,
My mom
how
sat
lucky.
there and took pictures, while me and my brother climbed on it. Suddenly, my father turned pale. He grabbed my mother's arm and pointed to the woods. My
Skinwalker.
curious brother and I followed the direction he pointed. Now, it's not common to see wolves where I grew up, especially a pack of them so close to human contact. But I remember
Now it's
counting
30.
9 wolves. Each one gave me a sense of what I was doing offended them.
Nope.
I remember my dad quickly picking me and my brother up and carrying us over to the car. Then, faster than we came, we left. As we drove away, I stared back at those wolves, and they were looking back at me, until we were out of sight. Several years later, I was 12, and I was always drawn to this portion of the woods about a half-mile from our home. I grew up in a small town, and I was beginning to read stories of old myths and legends of demons and shapeshifters and skinwalkers. I went on a hike through the woods one day, just doing what kids do, and I was enjoying myself. I didn't think much of it until I found a small clearing. It was in this swampy area. I had always heard rumors of a hermit living in these woods.
Yay.
Supposedly, people had seen him here and there, but I was told no one ever got close. Not sure
That's
that I
creepy.
believed it, I began to walk this marshy area until I got a weird feeling in my gut. It was that feeling that something was looking at you. I stopped, and I looked towards the sun. It was maybe noon and clouds were light, and before my walk, it had been a hot day out. So when this cold chill came upon me, it was alarming to say the least. I turned to see a figure looming in a dark portion of the woods, and my body turned to stone. I remember sheer panic rising up in my throat, but my body refused to comply with the natural instinct to run for dear life. Their
Dear
eyes
life.
were the creepiest part. They reminded me of topaz. They were very demonic. Soon my petrification was over,
Hey, what are you trying to say
so I
about
turned
Topaz?
and ran back the way I came. But mere seconds later, I could hear something behind me. Something was stalking me. I wasn't sure if it was hunting me, but I felt it watching me as I ran. I had never known such horror until that moment. I never returned to those woods ever again. I was so scared I slept with the lights on for days. My dad and I used to cruise around
Hey.
and talk away from my mother's ears because she didn't condone dark paranormal talk. I guess she didn't believe in such things. He told me of a time when he was 17. He and his friends went out to a nature reserve in their hometown. They were drinking beer and having fun.
Okay.
My dad said that he had
That
told them
slowdown
that
was
he could
because
not drink
the-
much because he had to be the driver
The
home.
plug came out of the thing, I
He
guess.
told me that the moon was high and so it was bright. So the woods and the road were lit up. He said he was just cruising like we are now, and he didn't really want to be home right away. He was taking his time, when all of a sudden he saw this animal on the side of the road. It was very large and was hunched over eating some roadkill. He said when he stopped the vehicle, the creature stopped moving and then suddenly snapped to meet his eyes. He said whatever it was stood to about 7 feet tall. He said it looked like a mix between a man and a wolf. He said he was so scared that he ripped it into reverse and tried his best not to panic. Then he floored it. But this creature proceeded to run after him, and somehow, even though my dad was doing about 60 on the road, the thing was still out of his passenger window, keeping up with the vehicle. He thought to himself that he was going to die, but eventually he made it back to the main road. He said he felt like he never lost it, that he could feel it there in the woods somewhere, following them. And all in all, he was afraid to go home. This story really shook me, and I began to believe in the stories that I read.
You got scared of the fact.
Later on, when I was about 18, I
Maybe
came
followed
into
you.
contact with something from what he told me about as a child. I was out with a friend hunting squirrels in the woods. We had about 5 squirrels, and we were carrying them back to our vehicle, when suddenly we saw this blood trail. So obviously, being morbid young adults, we followed the trail. As soon as we came up to the end of the trail, sheer terror struck my face. I looked up to this large oak tree with the torso of a large deer hanging from it.
Oh.
At first, I assumed that some hunter couldn't wait until he got home,
Yeah,
so they
and
were
he's gonna
prepping the
hang it
deer
from the
in the
tree.
woods in an unorthodox
I
fashion.
don't think so.
Besides, there weren't any animals around that could do that, and the body was far from clean. It was messy and looked like it had almost exploded all over the place,
Ugh.
and there were obvious claw marks in the side of its torso.
Okay, that's definitely not
I
human,
looked
dude.
over at my friend, and at that point, he was panicking. He was
Don't lie to
reloading
me,
his
that's not human.
22. Every time he spoke, he stuttered,
Human don't have
and
claws.
his face was pale white.
That's a
Seeing him
really
act
weird
like
person,
that,
but-
it began to scare me, so I started to reload my weapon
That's
as
some
well,
strong fingernails.
because the only other weapon we had besides guns was an old hatchet, and that wasn't going to do much. We were miles from town, and we had not seen anyone in the large wooded area all day. So we ran the opposite way of the bloody trail, when we heard sticks snapping behind us in a quick pace. Soon we came upon this small cave out in the woods, but in front of it lay the other half of that deer.
Nope.
All either of us could feel at that moment was pure fear. I tried telling my friend not to panic, but we pointed our guns
we're
at the
panicking.
direction we
Everyone's
were hearing
panicking.
the sounds, aware that something was watching us. Like fearful idiots, we began firing in random directions,
Oh yeah, good job.
trying to kill whatever it was, not even thinking about other people's lives or our own. When there was no ammunition left, we both turned and ran.
Nope.
And since that day, we have vowed never to tell anyone about it. And this is the first time I've ever told another soul. Number 4. A real skinwalker sighting. Submitted by Anonymous. I live in Utah, and it's one of the most overlooked states, but that doesn't mean it hasn't had its fair share of monster sightings and paranormal experiences. Anyway, my family goes camping every summer for 5 days in Ashley National Forest up in the high Uintas. So my family arrived at the campsite at around 10:30 p.m. It would have been darker out if it had not been for the huge bonfire my family made. So I was setting up my tent when I saw 2 red eyes in the trees nearby. It startled me, but I didn't panic. I really didn't have any reason to be concerned. It was just some animal in the woods. Therefore, I didn't pay it much mind. Later the next morning, I was curious, so I walked over to the spot where the eyes were, and I saw deep hoof prints of a deer in the ground. There was a massive population of deer around here, so there was nothing wrong with this. I ignored it and went to breakfast. A few nights later, on the last night, I asked my cousin if she would go to the bathroom with me, and she said yes. As she and I were walking to the outhouse, we saw what looked like a goat on the side of the mountain. We thought this was odd, because we had never seen goats up here before, and this didn't look like a mountain goat at all. So we went on to the bathroom, but when we came back from it, we saw the goat again, but this time it was facing us. And that's when we saw the brightest red eyes we'd ever seen. They were so similar to the ones I'd seen on the first night. Freaked out, we walked slowly away from this weird animal, but all the way back to camp, I could feel those eyes on me. The next morning, we decided to go fishing before we left, so we packed up everything and picked a spot to fish on the river. Keep in mind that this is Indian territory, which is already a dumb idea because we could have gotten fined. But we headed out anyway and caught a lot of fish. So after we were done fishing, my cousin and I spotted something in the brush along the edge of the forest nearby. And sure enough, there were those same red eyes. But this time it wasn't from a goat or a deer. All we could make out was a pale, skinny figure that was both human and inhuman at the same time. But I'll never forget those eyes. They were the same eyes as before. My cousin and I just stared at the thing when it finally broke the silence. It bellowed this ear-piercing scream. And that's when we began to book it back to the campground as fast as we could. But the thing was chasing us through the undergrowth. Whatever it was gaining on us fast, but we could see the campground, so we booked it even harder. Soon, we got to the camp, and the thing was nowhere to be seen. It was gone, but not before giving one final ear-piercing screech. My friend and I don't talk about what we saw often, but we know it to be real, and we both believe it was a skinwalker. Number 5. The Twin Skinwalkers. Submitted by John.
They're twins.
I had the great honor of meeting not one, but 2 skinwalkers at the same time. Let me go over the landscape first. From where I was, to the right of me was an open grass field, and next to the grass field was the community college I would be later attending. To the other side of me, on the left, was a golf course that intertwines with a small forest and path going around. I have been on that path several times before, always getting this weird feeling that something wasn't right about it. It was off, just not right. I was out doing what I usually do during summer nights, walking around listening to music. Because it was summer, the nights were nice and cool. All I needed was a t-shirt and a pair of cargo shorts, plus my favorite hat and shoes. It was about 12:30 at night when I was passing the golf course near my house. I got the feeling that something was watching me. Of course, I've gotten this feeling before, but it felt stronger this night. So I stopped, and I looked around several times to see if there was someone other than myself outside.
And if they're watching
Spotting no one, I took out my headphones to listen, hoping I could find out that way. It was then that I realized it was way too quiet. The sounds of nature were gone. No sounds of cars in the distance like there usually was. Certainly there should have been some sort of noise, but I heard absolutely nothing. It was very chilling. Tonight. I stayed still for a moment, thinking. Then I remembered that I had brought my flashlight with me. Being delighted that I had brought it, I reached down to my pocket and pulled it out. If something was there, I was hoping to catch its glowing eyes in the flashlight beam. When I clicked on the flashlight beam, almost instantly, I saw these glowing eyes. I stood stock still as I stared at what was before me. I did not expect 2 pairs of glowing orange eyes staring right at me. I've never seen eyes like that. They were almost literally glowing orange. Not sure what to do other than stay still as possible. I just stared right back at them. It was then that I noticed how high the pair of eyes were off of the ground. They were maybe 7 feet from the ground.
Guys, I'm gonna need you guys to
chill. What kind of animal stands that tall around here? I noticed that they never blinked even once. It was extremely creepy, and I kept hoping that it was some sort of trick of the eyes. I stood there
darn.
for what felt like 10 minutes, staring back at these creepy eyes. I was trying to think of what I could do. I did not want to get any closer than what I was, and I didn't want to risk getting attacked by whatever this thing was.
I thought you already
If I
said that.
kept going along the path, I'd be going right past it. Running might have been my only option.
I didn't want to get attacked
With
by what
that on
this
my
thing was.
mind,
I also didn't
slowly
want attacked by what
started
it
to
was.
turn my
What?
back so it was facing the field, my flashlight still on the glowing eyes. I was very cautious, very slow. I took baby steps, one at a time. When I thought I got far enough away from that thing, I decided to walk a bit faster. I wanted to get a good head start ahead of this thing before it ever decided to give chase. Before I turned off my flashlight and put it back in my pocket, I remembered that my music was still going. I looked down for a second, and I saw that my earbuds were hanging out of my shirt.
Ooh, well.
And I've always hated them like that while running. So I decided to put them back in to listen to music.
Okay,
Whatever
when you're
would take
running
my
from
mind
something?
off of things.
Really?
As soon as they were back in my ears and my
I don't think you want
flashlight was
that
back in
blocking
my
your
pocket,
hearing. Thank you.
I made a mad dash for home. I was going so fast that my hat almost flew off. So I quickly
I guess
turned
if
the
you were
hat
gonna run
around
for home
so it
anyway.
didn't fall, and I continued to sprint. I just kept telling myself to ignore it, to run faster and faster. And then I did the one thing you don't want to do.
You looked back.
I looked behind me.
Darn it!
I'm curious by default, so of course I looked behind me to see if whatever it was had given chase. And what do you know? It did, but it confused me. From the short glimpse I got of it, it looked to be a really large coyote, borderline wolf size. The sight of it made my adrenaline
1,000
rush,
saves.
and I pumped
Nice.
my legs to go even faster. When I glanced back again, there were two of them, both keeping up and following me. As I approached my house with these things still tailing me, I was thinking of the fastest way to enter the house. I did not want to be outside too long trying to get in, so I decided going through the garage would be my best bet. Again, I looked behind me, and I didn't see anything, but I was not about to relax. As soon as I got up to the garage, I pushed in the code and opened it just enough to get under the door. I rushed over to the other side to close it. I finally felt a bit safe, and my adrenaline was wearing down. At that point, my lungs were burning as if they were on fire. I was gasping for air, slumping to the ground, just sitting there for a moment. For a long time after this, I wondered what I saw, even if they were the biggest coyotes in existence, or actual wolves where there shouldn't be. That doesn't explain those orange eyes. No animal has eyes like that.
Do they not?
It was far from natural.
What about snakes? Oh, those are yellow eyes, I
Number
guess.
6.
I'm sure there's at least one
Australian
with fire orange
skinwalker.
eyes.
Submitted by Carly. I'm a young woman from a remote part of Western Australia. I'm surrounded by thousands of kilometers of farmland and bushland. Forest, if you're not familiar with the term bush. And we have a large variety of native wildlife on our farm and in surrounding bushlands. Anyway, on to the story. Every day after work, I walk my 2 border collies through a selected bush track, which is roughly 10 kilometers long as a way to unwind from my crappy job. I've seen some very creepy things in there before, such as dead kittens and livestock, which have been dumped by farmers and thrown across logs in a creepy
Ew.
fashion. But that's nothing compared to what I saw on this day. It is important to note that since we are so rural here, there's a severe lack of people. But sometimes I still pass a camper or two, and sometimes even someone growing drugs out in the remote
Oh, are you
bush.
serious?
So, as I was walking my dogs late last year in the middle of summer, I was surprised when my 2 dogs stopped and began to growl. I could see the hair on the back of their necks began to stand up. I thought that it may have just been a kangaroo or a feral pig, as my younger dog gets quite worked up when they're around. This thought quickly faded when I felt cold,
That dog
and I
doesn't
broke
make
out in
pigs at all.
goosebumps, even though it was a hot 37 degrees Celsius outside. A couple of seconds after the temperature
You're gonna walk
dropped,
right past me.
I
Good job.
rounded the corner, and there was a little girl standing in the middle of the bush trail.
Oh,
And
well,
suddenly
no.
seeing someone there scared me.
Nope.
The little girl was looking in the opposite direction with her back to me and looked around 7 years old by her height. She had dirty blonde, medium-length hair, a plain red shirt, and black shorts.
Yeah.
As I was about to laugh to myself about letting this little girl scare me, who was probably just camping with her parents,
Then she turned her head and it was
turned,
black eyes.
and she looked at me. This was no girl. Her eyes were solid black.
Oh.
Not black
I was
as in
just joking.
contact black, but a hollow, lifeless black.
I was like, it's one of
This
them again.
thing opened its mouth and let out an ear-splitting howl.
Oh, no,
Turned
Exorcist.
and ran
No.
back on all fours into the bush.
Oh my god. Exorcist,
Needless
literally.
to say, I hightailed it
Nope.
out of there,
Nope.
dragging my poor, cowering, frightened farm dogs, and ran for about 6 kilometers. I was completely filled with fear and covered in goosebumps, and I felt adrenaline rush inside me. My lungs were burning, and my legs ached, and my head spun. After about another 2 kilometers, I finally got home. I ran inside and locked the dogs and myself in my bedroom. I was too scared to come out to even eat dinner. After that, I did not walk through that bush for a month. But since walking again, I have not experienced anything out of the ordinary.
I hope not. That'd suck.
I've been walking this bush since I was 10 years old, and I've never experienced anything like this before. I'm sharing this with you, trying to figure out what I saw. Judging by the feral look in her
I think
eyes
you
and the
saw
way
an
she
exorcist.
scurried away, perhaps it was an Australian skinwalker, a native aboriginal spirit, disguised as a little girl. Or maybe, if I'm lucky, it was just some really effed up prank played by some campers.
Oh,
Either way,
that'd be
I'll never
creepy too,
walk through the
honestly.
bush the same way again. And number 7. Something from the desert followed me.
Oh, great.
Submitted
Alright.
by XII or Sui.
Chop Suey?
Many of you may not believe this story, and honestly, I'm having a bit of a hard time believing it myself. I live in a small community in the middle of an empty desert. My biological father is a bit of a menace. He has thrown several of my cats and some strays I used to feed into the desert. Several of them have not been seen or heard from again.
Ah, asshole dead.
Now, to the story. I recently began to hear one of my cats meows from the desert, and have taken my dog walking out there searching for her. After 3 days of going out, calling, searching, and getting no actual replies when I was out there,
Then you
I
heard it,
finally
right?
realized something. Those mews I had been hearing did not sound
3
right.
more.
There was something completely off about them.
Then
And I have been able to
20
ignore
more
that
go.
until I began to hear
23.
frantic cries from the cat in the desert. Sneaking out once again, I just stood near the entrance, calling and looking around, while my dog sniffed at an old abandoned mattress. It was around sunset, and honestly I did not like being out there when all I could see were shadows and just a few feet in front of me. I stayed there for 10 minutes until I started hearing what I thought were troublemakers trying to scare me, or at least trying to sneak up on me for whatever reason. So I quickly scooped up my dog and dashed back inside the community walls, making my way back home, literally across the entrance from the desert, a hole in a brick wall. That night was filled with the mews outside my window, and they kept sounding wrong, like distorted.
Don't
I
meow
was
at
very
me.
grateful that I remembered to shut my curtains, because I did not want to see what was making those noises, because it was not my cat.
Yeah, no kidding.
2 hours later, the meowing finally stopped, but when I looked at the window, I could see the shadow of a face pressed against it.
No.
As I looked at the face, I heard strange, distorted cries again. Suddenly, without warning, the face turned, and then the figure disappeared.
Okay, that's creepy.
Soon after that, I heard the footsteps and talking from kids outside the window.
Creepy.
Something was mimicking voices. The next day, I decided to spend the week at my grandmother's to get away. It felt like I was losing my mind. The first few nights were pretty normal and quiet, until one early morning I was standing near my older cousin's window, and I heard those same meows again.
Shoot.
So I woke up my cousin, and she said she could hear them too. I don't like when people can see or hear things I'm dealing
Because
with,
it means it's happening in
because
real
that
life.
makes it more real.
'Cause it is
And that
real.
was something I couldn't deny anymore. While at my grandma's, I would usually sit outside late and visit with my cousin's 2 cats until she got home from work. However, for the last few nights I was there, I did not feel safe continuing my routine of waiting outside. One night I was foolish, and I waited outside, and I could hear chirping and meowing from the golf course across
Great.
from my
It's
grandma's
meowing over there
house.
too.
The sounds did not stop until I hid behind one of the pillars on her porch and stood motionless. I'd been home for 2 days now, and whatever that is stays outside my window, torturing me. I refuse to walk my dog at night unless someone is with me, and I have never returned to the desert. Every now and then I'll hear a whisper and book it back into the house. I'm praying and hoping that this is just someone's sick joke, but my grandma believes it's a skinwalker. We've even found a few footprints outside my window after it had rained. And the strangest part is, they start out animal and slowly become human. I feel like I'm slowly going insane.
Yay.
Skinwalkers are horrific creatures of Native American folklore. Sometimes they might be other people with sinister powers and purpose, and sometimes they're creatures trying to mimic humans to lure them in. And who knows what happens when they get you? Maybe you wake up in bed thinking it was a nightmare, or maybe you wind up dead in the forest with all your skin torn off. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your airport horror stories soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks. Sure, it sounds fun, but a road trip could be a ride straight to hell. This world is a strange one. I, for one, am a big fan of road trips. Whether I'm driving or getting motion sickness in the back seat from reading stuff on my phone for too long, a road trip can be relaxing and fun, especially when you see new places. But new places can also mean new dangers. You're exposing yourself to strange places, strange people, and not in the sexy way. And the only protection you have from people that really are exposing themselves is the thin plastic and metal of a car. So if you think you can survive, let's stop by the gas station first and grab some beef jerky for the ride.
How about the minimum glass?
Sounds like a good last meal to me. Enjoy these allegedly true road trips from hell. But first, have you had a creepy experience with cops? Or are you a cop who's had a terrifying moment on the job? I would love to read your story. Also, I'd love to hear some more creepy McDonald's stories if you've got them. Just send them over to us at darknessprevails.org, and we might just feature them in a new video. Or visit our submission page and check out all the stories that we're looking for. Thank you in advance. Now, I call shotgun. Literally, I get to hold the shotgun. Because I think I saw something lurking just outside the window.
I call shotgun.
Number 1. Gas Station Stalker. Submitted by Aiden A. One day, me, my dad, and my dad's girlfriend and her 2 boys went to the coast of Oregon to spend time with my grandparents for Christmas vacation. The trip was a complete disaster, so we left early. On the long road trip back, we stopped at a gas station to grab some snacks for the ride. Now, when I saw the place had extra hot Cheetos and pizza pockets, I went right for the Cheetos first. Then I went up to the cashier for my pizza pocket. And almost immediately I noticed the guy behind the counter. He was pale, sweating, and his mouth was slightly open the whole time.
Okay.
He seemed so nervous and twitchy. Could I get 2 pizza pockets, please? I asked.
Okay.
This only seemed to bother him more. I don't know if he was on edge, or if he was always like this, but it really creeped me out. He gave me my food and I paid for my snacks. Thanks, I said hesitantly, and I walked out of there. I couldn't walk away fast enough, to be honest, but that was not the last time I saw that man. Later down the road on our trip back, we were in a traffic jam. We didn't know what had happened up ahead, but traffic was at a dead crawl. We were all just sitting there in the car, silent, trying to pass the time in our own ways. Suddenly there's this loud crash right next to me, and before I know what's happening, something grabs hold of my arm and begins to pull me out of the window. At this point, I'm kicking and I'm screaming. Honestly, I've never been so surprised in my life. And almost immediately, that surprise was replaced with fear. I had no idea what was happening. I grabbed hold of the seat in front of me, and I could see my family's faces contort in fear and anger. Sure enough, I wasn't the only one screaming.
Uh-oh.
I watched as my dad jumped out of the car. He ran up behind me and began to hit the assailant. Then
that
whoever
guy?
it was released my arm, and I turned around.
Trying to kidnap
And
you?
there, in the middle of the road, surrounded by traffic-jammed cars, my dad was in a struggle with the man from the gas station.
What an asshole.
All I can remember thinking was, what the hell? What did he want? And
Also-
why would he follow us all this way?
Also, why is he trying to kidnap
Apparently,
you?
he
That's
had
the big
busted the
question.
window to the car and yanked me out of it. Or at least tried to. I don't know what he was thinking, doing this in broad daylight with people everywhere. The man broke away from my father, and then disappeared between the cars. The cops were called, and we all filed reports. Beyond that, I don't know what came of him. As for the rest of that day, no one said a word on the way home after that. But I can say that I hope this man is in jail. Because if he's not, who's to say he won't try this on someone else?
Yeah.
And who knows what his plan would have been had he succeeded in kidnapping me. Number 2. The Ghost Light.
Roll.
Submitted by
Alright.
Chris. Let me begin by saying that this is based on an actual paranormal spot in southeast Arkansas. I have only been there once when I was visiting my aunt in Crosset, many years ago. The legend begins in the early 1900s, when all Crosset was known for was its decent railroad track. The track spanned all across the county, and even reached into the neighboring county. Well, according to legend, one day a man was either drunk, asleep, or dead on the railroad tracks.
Hey, die.
The men coming down the railroad did not see the man on the tracks until they tragically ran him over. Soon after that, people who lived close to the railroad claimed they would be walking home from work in the dark, and a strange glowing light would be around 20 yards behind them, wherever they went. And of course, in those days,
That's
we
not
can't say maybe a streetlight, maybe another car, because at that point in Arkansas, many people didn't even have indoor plumbing, much less streetlights.
But what about the car?
This phenomenon continued until it became a fun urban legend for kids and teens to investigate in their free time. And to this day, people still drive out there to get a good scare. My story begins when I was 13 years old. I was visiting my aunt in the Deep South. I had never been any further down south than Kansas City, so it was a huge shock. The accents, the trees, the lack of entertainment there. In spite of all this, my aunt tried her best to make it a fun trip for us. My sister and me, that is. However, at 13, your imagination can only take you so far. So one night we were sitting in the living room, just watching TV, when my cousins began to talk about the ghost light. They told me that it was just 4 miles down the road. I found this urban legend amazing. In the city, we never heard of things like that. Haunted dirt roads? I was of course intrigued. My aunt walked into the room as we were talking about it and overheard us. She told us her own stories of going out to see this ghost light.
Aunt's trying so hard.
So my cousin Kara and I begged her to take us there.
Kara?
At first, she
Cool.
was hesitant, but she eventually relented and told us to load up in the car. I was so excited. So we did just that. We all loaded up in the car, including my aunt's rat terrier,
Yay.
who went everywhere with her, and headed to see the ghostly light everyone spoke of. She took us a ways down the highway, and then turned down a private paved road by a small airport.
19.
And then finally, we headed straight onto an old dirt back road. The worst kind of road for a car. It was exactly how you would imagine driving over a washboard. We came down the road a bit and saw 4 big oak trees with blue paint, and in white a picture of the hangman. Suddenly, my aunt's dog began to growl, but this made it even more interesting, all of us getting creeped out by the dog. We all came out there to see
Dog's like, "I'm
something,
trying to
and
protect
my
you,
hopes
don't be
were
impressed."
definitely up. Besides, the dog probably just saw something in the woods. It was
That makes
odd,
it better.
nonetheless.
And the Skinwalker.
Eventually, we hit the end of this road and end up at a 4-way, where you're supposed to turn around and go back the way you came, then park 100 yards away from the turnaround. Sorry if I sound terrible at directions. Anyway,
mean,
as we parked the
that's okay.
car, we turned
I'm
the
not
engine
planning to go
on,
there, I don't care.
and we flashed our lights. Then we waited patiently in that dark car, in the middle of the dead black woods. At first, we didn't see anything, and then, in the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a green glow. I looked directly at it,
Yay.
and noticed it was waving, almost like in a swinging motion.
Oh, it's waving.
My aunt then
Hi.
told us that supposedly that green glow is the man who was run over by the train. He was still searching for his head. I shuddered and hoped that maybe it was just a coincidence. Paranormal investigators came here years ago to investigate it, but they claimed it was just gas bubbles from the railroad, she stated. So that's just a gas bubble? I asked, a bit relieved.
Yeah.
Oh no, honey, that's the real deal. Right there in front of you. Those investigators came and investigated this road, and the one down the road. The one down the road is positively gas bubbles. It doesn't move when it's out, she said with no emotion on her face. She continued. When
Are
they
you sure she's
investigated
not
this
trying
road,
to be
they
scary?
found no traces of gas, and they could never get any closer than 70 feet from this thing. I stared ahead, starting to get kind of scared at this point.
Grandma, stop
We
trying
continued
to
to watch as the
stop trying
ball
to
of
scare him
light
on
got
purpose.
larger and brighter, and then suddenly it went out. And a moment later, we saw the skyline light up,
Ooh,
and we
stop
saw
for-
what
for
looked like an
using ice.
approaching car. My aunt turned on the engine, flicked on the lights, and moved up a bit closer to get a better look. We still saw
Yay.
the blinding white
Perfect.
light, which looked identical to a car's lights. But it wasn't. After getting to its brightest peak, the car lights slowly faded out,
Oh.
almost like the fade-out option on PowerPoints. It was weird.
Oh.
I
Okay.
was really freaked out
That's
at this
weird.
point, and I could feel my heart pounding. I began getting goosebumps. I was ready to go, but everyone else wasn't. If anything, they were ready for more.
People
My
are
aunt
weird.
shut off the engine, which I knew instantly was a terrible mistake. My cousins watched intently, waiting on the next sight of the light.
And then a train.
I looked around at the area I was in, my eyes again adjusting to the darkness. In the woods beside us, I saw what I thought was someone or something walking briskly.
It's like, hey,
But with
give
the
him a head.
windows up, I couldn't
need to
see
get
as
ahead.
much, and I couldn't hear anything at all. A few moments after that, the light showed itself again. This time it was glowing an orange or yellow color, and
It's
flickering.
mad.
I watched, even in fear, praying it wouldn't be a serious thing. Then seconds after that, my aunt's dog began to go crazy.
trying to lure you away
She
with this
started
creepy
barking and
lights.
crying at the same time, jumping from seat to seat. As my eyes were following her, I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. I remember thinking to myself, "Oh God."
What?
The thing turned crimson red
Oh, it's
and was
red.
not moving from side to side or flickering
Oh,
anymore.
man.
It was now flying, shooting down the dirt road, heading straight for our car.
Oh, shit, it's
I
a train.
panicked, and so did my aunt, because she hurried to turn the engine on. Sadly, that never
didn't
works out, does it?
work.
Because the car would not start.
See,
We were
told you.
all panicking. My cousin Kara started crying as my aunt frantically tried to start the engine. This creepy red light was a mere 30 feet away from our
Oops.
car,
Oh,
and it was huge. It looked like a supermoon overshadowing our windshield,
That's
highlighting the
'cause- that's 'cause
dashboard
it's
and
the
the
train
terrified
light.
face of my aunt. We sat there a moment, realizing the car was not going to start, and that thing was only a few feet away. So we just stared
and then
and
it was a
waited
jeep.
for our impending doom.
It was a jeep.
It stood still. It would not move or budge. It just stood there, the big red blob. The car began to shake a bit, and then there was silence. Then it would shake a little bit harder, and we all began screaming again.
Lights intensify.
It felt like something was trying to pick up the car. My aunt tried again and again to turn over the engine, but the thing was completely dead, which
Where's my
absolutely
head?
made no
Oh.
sense. The car was still shaking, and we saw that the light still hadn't moved. It was just sitting there. It felt like it was staring into our souls.
I'm just waiting for you guys
Finally,
to move.
after several minutes, the car cranked itself back to life, and my aunt swung on the headlights and floored it. When the lights came on, we saw a good outline of our harasser, and I will never forget
Oh, that's
what
it,
I
man.
saw. The red light was still ever so red, but within it, I saw the outline of a woman carrying a lantern.
What?
It was the lantern glowing red. As my aunt sped down the road, the blob still did not move or give chase. My aunt drove straight through the red fog on the woman.
There's a woman?
The red enveloped the car as we drove through her, and the last thing I saw was the outline of her creepy smile. We made it home safe, but we all were kind of silent for the rest of the night. And I never visited that town again.
That's what you get for
I
harassing me.
can't say I
What you
would
think?
want to. I still see my aunt and cousins for the holidays, but it's far away from that portal to hell. And when I see them, I can't help but think about that short nighttime road trip that we all regret. I don't know if anyone has heard of this place, but it's probably the scariest thing I've ever seen. I still see that faded red smile, that crooked, sadistic smile. Number 3. Skinwalkers are out there. Submitted by Aaron F. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a fairly large city, and right down the middle runs the Rio Grande River, and the river feeds a small forest that runs along it. We call this forest the Basque. There are some really unusual and creepy things that occur in the Basque. One of these creepy things is the Shroom House. It's this old adobe house that's been there through the ages.
So is it shaped like a mushroom
house?
house?
We call it the
or
Shroom
make
House
mushrooms?
because there are mushrooms spray painted all over the thing.
Oh.
I've been there a couple of times during the day, but I've never met someone who's been there during the night. One night, however, I can say that I'm that person, along with my friends who went with me. The night started off with me and Michaela. I picked her up, and immediately we began to smoke to forget the day's labor.
You're taking
I
some
call up
mushrooms.
my friend Matt, and both I and Michaela agreed to join Matt at his house. There we meet 2 of his neighbors. Honestly, I can't remember their names. Just know they were with us.
Apparently you're not
We were
friends
playing
enough,
pool and just trying to catch up. It must have been 12 midnight by then. We got bored and none of us were tired.
Midnight hour.
So I had the brilliant idea to go on a road trip to the Shroom House to see if we can smoke some weed there and creep each other out.
Yeah.
With no objections, we hop in my red Mazda 6 and head to the Basque. I turn off the main road and onto a side road, and then a dirt one, and then finally pull into a dirt parking lot. The more dirt on the road, the closer we were getting. This dirt parking lot is pretty big, and on the north side is a chain-link fence that separates the dense vegetation from the dirt road. The fence follows the parking lot halfway, and then turns into a 2-foot-high wooden beam that lines the parking lot. Where the chain-link fence ends is a small animal trail that leads to the end of a small dugout ditch. If you carefully cross that ditch without getting caught by the vegetation in your face, you follow another animal trail that finally leads you to the Shroom House.
Oh, yeah?
I put my vehicle in park. We all jump out excitedly and stop at the animal trail. Who's got a flashlight?
Who's got a
I
flashlight?
look up and the moon is full,
flashlight?
and everything is well lit up. I have a lighter, I said. Obviously,
Oh,
we were all
light
chatting
your
and
way.
having a good time, and we said a whole lot more than I'm writing here. Anyway, I crouched down and started crawling through the animal trail with the lighter in front. My friends were behind me. I make it to the dugout ditch and hop down. I look to my left and my friends decide to walk the rim of this ditch. We all kind of stopped, looking around us for the trail that leads to the house, when we suddenly hear it. Now, the ditch goes off perpendicular from the animal trail we were on. I was in the ditch with the lighter in hand. We could hear a small animal shuffling through the vegetation about 30 feet from the ditch.
Not suspicious.
We could hear the small animal making small little steps. We didn't think much of it when we realized it wasn't running away in fear from us. Whatever it was seemed to be pacing back and forth. All of a sudden, those small little animal steps turned into big gaping ones.
Oh?
The thing suddenly sounded heavy, little soft crunches to big heaping footsteps. Now we were all freaking out, and before we knew it, this thing was running toward me in the ditch. Before I could even say it's running towards us, my friends had already started back through the animal trail to my car. Now, even though we were scared and freaking out, we still had to crouch over and crawl through this trail. Otherwise, you would definitely lose an eye trying to full-on sprint through this vegetation. Luckily, we had some distance on this creature, but I could tell from my friends' demeanors that they weren't taking this all too seriously. Weed and liquor will do that to you.
Yeah, weed.
But you can be assured that I was sober. They didn't have the pep in their step like I did, and I could still hear this thing full-on sprinting through the woods, and it was getting closer by the second. They were long and strong strides, and as it drew closer, I began to hear this weird, thick, slow breathing.
Ooh, creepy.
I yelled to my friends in front in a frantic voice to hurry up. With that, my friends chuckling and, oh my gosh, we're having a good time, stroll turned into serious, let's get the heck out of here running. By this time, I could feel this thing right behind me. I pushed my friends along as fast as I could,
go, you drunkards.
flicking my lighter and taking a glance behind me. What I saw nearly made me trip. White skin and bare feet. This thing was not crouched over like us. It was straight up barreling through the thick shrubs. Luckily, that was the end of the trail, and we were all jumping in my car within seconds. Before me and Matt get in, however, we take a second look back to see if we were being followed still. It wasn't, so me and Matt decided to walk up to the chain link fence. It was just 10 feet away from the animal trail that we had just escaped out of. Trying to peer through, we couldn't see much save for leaves and branches, when all of a sudden, like textbook, the thing came crashing against the fence. Without chancing our luck any further, we hopped in my car and sped off. In recollection, I can remember the moon and how bright it was for midnight, but when I was in the ditch, I remember how freaking pitch black it was. It was as if someone turned out the moon, if that makes any sense. Anyway, that's my story. I can't explain what we saw any more than that, and it will always reverberate in my head. Just what did we see that night? Number 4. A Trip to Savannah. Submitted by Ginger Cat. I've traveled to many places, but my trip to Savannah will always be my most memorable. My friend Mickey and I have always had a love for the supernatural. She loves telling ghost stories, and I've always had a sense for paranormal activity. So when I mentioned I was going to Savannah for my grandma's birthday, a place that's practically crawling with spirits, she was ecstatic. "You have to go on a ghost tour," she yelled happily. I don't know. I've heard bad stuff can happen on those tours.
How about you go on a ghost tour?
Replied.
Why am I going?
If you go on one, we'll have more stories to tell, she insisted.
How about you go
Mom,
alone,
I said.
girl?
She squealed with excitement. I smiled, but in reality I was scared.
Yeah, no.
Telling stories about the paranormal is fun, but witnessing it is much more terrifying.
Yeah, no thanks.
So the next day I talked to my mom about it. She used to do paranormal investigating, so I figured she would agree. And as I expected, she did. The road trip there was long, maybe 3 or 4 hours. But when we finally got to our hotel, I was practically starving. So we went into a really good restaurant in the hotel and ate. After we finished, we went up to our room to unpack. Now, as a former ghost hunter, I remembered one of my mom's ghost hunting tools. I figured I could at least try to go searching the hotel halls before bed with it, just to make sure I could sleep without being a total chicken. So after asking my mom if I could use it, I grabbed her EMF meter and walked out the door. The halls were completely empty, but still cozy looking. I took a deep breath and began to walk, my eyes staring at the meter. I didn't want to miss a thing. I'd walked 6 doors down until it went from green to yellow to red. Supposedly, green meant the least amount of energy, and red being the most.
Oh shit.
So I did what I always do.
Run!
I checked for interference. To do that, I pointed it at the walls. The walls were green. The lights were green, and the floor was green. But then I pointed it to the door, and that was red.
Okay, that's
I walked
weird.
over to another door and pointed the device at that one, but it was green. I felt confused. Maybe I wasn't using it right.
Yeah.
So I went to check the red door again, and I felt a cold pressure on my leg, and a chill ran up my back, like a cold breeze. So I started walking back to our room, officially and completely creeped out at that point. But in the middle of the hallway, I stopped, because I could feel something like a cold hand on my shoulder.
Stop.
And then I heard a whispered voice in my ear, a voice that was disturbingly clear. "Get out."
No.
I froze for a few moments, wondering how I could have possibly heard something after just stepping out into the hallway, something angry at that. So it didn't take me long to grab the meter and dash down the hallway back to our room. I was halfway back to the room, running and out of breath. At one point, I couldn't help but look behind me, and then I heard it again. "Get out!"
Yeah, get out of here.
This time, however, when it spoke, I felt breath against my face.
It's like, go away,
I
dang
turned and didn't look back again.
Crazy kids.
When I reached our door, I pounded on it so hard that when my mom opened it, she looked at me like I was crazy. I told her everything that had happened.
Just tell me to get out,
and luckily she believed me. though she seemed jealous that I had encountered something so quickly. The next day, I
don't
was
think he
still
wants to
visibly
encounter something,
shaken,
thank you.
but we were still scheduled to go on the tour, and we had already paid. My mom convinced me to go, and
Your
told me that I
mom.
wouldn't have to actually do anything. So I agreed. I didn't want
You
to ruin
better
my
s-
grandma's birthday anyway. Even in going, it turned out to be fun, and I'd almost forgotten everything that had happened the day before. That is, until our tour guide decided to have an EVP session.
Oh, of course you did.
I thought it would be cool to ask a question. I mean, what were the chances it would actually answer me?
Yeah.
Well, I was very surprised.
Should have said, why do you
I
keep telling me to get out?
asked, "Are you in heaven or with God?" When our tour guide played back the tape, the first thing I heard scared the absolute crap out of me.
He's like, get out. I don't give a shit.
Remember me. It
Get
said
out
so
of the
quietly,
damn
in a
room.
whisper, but it was very clear. It was that same terrifying voice. I began to freak out. Maybe that thing had followed me.
Do you
When the people around me heard it,
remember me?
I could see the surprise and
Do
fear on their
you?
faces.
Okay, sorry.
And my mom looked excited of all things.
Oh, your mom. It's weird.
All in all, the trip turned out to be the most productive and scary trip I've ever taken. When I got back to school, I told Mickey what happened, and she was happy to have another story to tell. But I told her, I'll tell my stories, but I'm done playing with the paranormal.
Yeah.
Supernatural things might seem fun to kids or teenagers,
Yeah, I don't want to
but
deal
I
with
hope
that shit.
most of them stay away from supernatural experiences like that. Some people just don't know how dangerous it can be. And number 5, Figure of My Imagination, submitted by Stella Real. I'm 13 years old, and even though I haven't been around that long, that doesn't mean I haven't seen some weird things in my life. I live in a town that's not really known for paranormal activity, but me and my dad have definitely experienced it. Actually, it's hard to choose which story to tell, so I'll tell the most recent. Every year, my family and I would go on a road trip somewhere, normally the same place, for camping during the summer. It's an AA camping trip, along with Alcoholics Anonymous members, and some of my friends would be there. On Halloween, the owners of the campsite would set something up called the Haunted Forest.
Oh, yeah.
I never went. I don't know why I didn't. I do have a passion for that kind of scary stuff,
Oh.
but I think it was because of my
Maybe you're
family,
busy.
who never really liked that stuff besides my dad. Anyway, on this year, my friends were playing something that I didn't want to do. So I walked out into the woods to explore the unfinished props for the Haunted Forest. There was a maze that I walked through that wasn't really a maze now that I think about it. A police station, and a castle and the prop room. I
Cute.
found a giant teddy bear. That wasn't
Nice.
really creepy, actually.
That's cute.
Mickey Mouse hands and gloves. A bat with fake nails in it. It was interesting to find this stuff,
That's
but in the
cute.
woods, alone, almost dark, with creepy items around, it was a bit eerie.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was getting darker by the moment when I found my friends on the path that led to where I was. They asked me where I had been and said I found a bunch of stuff.
Being
So
cool
of
with
course they wanted me
bears.
to show it to them, and I reluctantly agreed to show them. When we reached the prop shed, nothing was missing, but I saw something that apparently my friends did not see.
What?
It was on all fours and was the size of a Great Dane. When my friends continued
that
walking,
dog?
I stayed put. I stepped closer, and I saw a black figure. I thought it was a lost dog, for the creature was in the dark, and I couldn't see the nightmares that awaited. I was about to say something to call it over, but the creature stood up slowly, only to reveal that it was a very tall
Oh, it's
figure,
bipedal?
around 9 feet. The creature towered over me, to the point that it looked like I was sitting at the front seats of a movie theater. I was terrified, to the point that I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't scream because nothing would come out, and the darkness around me made it hard to run without running into something. I couldn't look away from its white pupils that were surrounded by nothing but pitch black.
Ooh.
Eventually, the creature walked off. Strange, I know, because I thought I was a goner for sure. After a while just staring off into the distance where the creature had walked into, I did a 180 and walked off.
Nope.
My mind could not
Screw
wrap
you guys.
itself around the event, but I found myself at the campgrounds in no
45,000.
time. My friends were there, but what was weird was that they were playing at the same game as when I left, like I wasn't
Okay.
even gone.
Wow.
I asked them what they were doing for the time I had left, and they said that they were playing this game the whole time.
Yeah, that you
And
didn't
what
even
was
get
weird
there,
was
did
that
you?
it was only 20 minutes since I had walked off. Thank God we were leaving that same day and time. Or else I think I would have lost my sanity from the paranoia.
It was a time
It's
loop.
been almost a year since that road trip to hell, and I'm still very paranoid. I used to have nightmares about me encountering that beast again, and dying a gruesome death. But now I can't even get a wink of sleep until the sun comes up, and insomnia doesn't help. Whenever I have a free moment to actually sleep during the day, I can never do it. Before this, I've seen paranormal things, but this was the most vivid thing I could ever remember. No matter how far-fetched or unbelievable this story sounds,
Yes,
I remember
thank
the
you.
experience very vividly in my head. Don't be overly worried about going outside, doing what you gotta do, or enjoying yourself on the road to your next vacation, because most people don't experience these types of horrors during their everyday lives. But if you do find yourself locked inside your dead car while someone or something outside begins to break the glass, let's just hope it's some guy trying to ask for directions. Oh, who am I kidding? Guys don't do that. It's probably someone trying to kill you.
Oh, of course.
Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your police stories and McDonald's stories soon at darknessprevails.org.
Bye, son.
Thanks.
Oh, shoot.
Subscribe and comment on the video and the card above for a chance to win a $20 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. Walmart might save you money, but there's no guarantee you'll make it out of there alive.
Ooh.
This world is a strange one. Walmart is not a bad place, don't get me wrong. It's a superstore chain dedicated to competitive prices and customer satisfaction. But as most of us have seen from pictures, videos, and in person, Walmart is often crowded with the strangest and creepiest people.
Yeah, sometimes they're
People who
real
don't feel
weird.
like wearing clothes in public. People who watch you around every corner. People who stare a little too long at the children who walk by.
Or people
So if
who
you
just
don't know
start
yet,
preaching for some
let me
reason in a
inform
store.
you about just how dangerous it might be to shop at Walmart
And more.
or anywhere with people. Enjoy these allegedly
Avoid people
true
altogether.
creepy Walmart stories. But first, I would love to hear your stories. I'm looking for submissions to put in my upcoming videos about police scary stories and McDonald's horror stories. So if you've got one to share, come on over to darknessprevails.org and share it with us. It might just end up in a future video. Anyway, let's see if we can ad match getting stalked by a psychopath.
Yay.
Number 1. Walmart Parking Lot Horror. Submitted by Jason D. I was a junior in high school, and I had just turned 18. I had been held back a grade, so I was a year behind. But being 18 meant I was an adult. So, when I got caught selling some pot to a friend, it pretty much ruined my life. I was soon labeled a felon, and only barely dodged prison time,
Well, don't
since it
sell
was my
pot.
first offense. Now, I was no drug dealer. This happened when a friend of mine didn't have a dealer to go to.
Oh, and you give it
And
to
I
you.
had some stuff that I wasn't going to use anyway. Bad timing, I guess.
Oh.
So I wasn't allowed back at school for my classes. All those college
friend is a
prep and
shitty
AP
friend.
courses I took and completed were worth nothing. All because I would not be getting a diploma. All that time and studying and hard work, it was all for nothing.
You're being that
To
friend's an
finish
asshole.
up my junior year, I had to take satellite courses from home, one final exam at the school offices supervised by the vice principal, and then it was over. I wasn't allowed to come back for a senior year or graduate from high school at all. My life was in the crapper. Thankfully, my family supported me and helped me out. I had an uncle who absolutely loved his pot. He even
Great.
used to deal in high school himself.
Yeah.
He was a manager at the local Walmart. I had fines to pay, otherwise my probation would be revoked, so he hired me. I don't know how he did it, but apparently they either skipped the background check or my uncle actually had enough reach to allow a felon on board his team. But I
Yes,
got a
this is
job at
just-
Walmart as a felon. At least for a month. Let it be known that after a month of working there, he was forced to fire me due to my felon status.
Oh.
I guess his hands were tied. Walmart was not about to let a pot smoker work for them.
He didn't smoke pot,
Anyway,
though.
during that long month, I worked as a cart pusher. I got the night hours so I could work on getting my GED during the day. It was far easier than my first job serving sandwiches at a Subway. Plus, I hardly had to deal with customers. I just stacked up the carts and rolled them into the cart bay just inside the building. It was as simple as that. But working at night out in a mostly empty parking lot, it always gave me this eerie feeling.
Yeah.
I have never been a paranoid person, not once in my life. I was never that guy after watching a scary movie that kept looking over his shoulders out of fear. No, I usually just went to bed or got on with my night.
Doesn't give a shit.
So maybe it was the stress of my criminal status and the massive fines I had to pay.
Ugh,
But I
nightmares.
felt like I was being watched constantly. I felt like someone was keeping a close eye on me at all times. For the first time in my life,
was
I
this your
found
friend who was a
myself
drug dealer?
glancing in every direction, chasing shadows that weren't really there. After the first few nights, I began pushing those carts a little harder, a bit faster, feeling as if someone was giving chase. I felt kind of stupid, to be honest. There were a couple of other cart pushers there with me, and I know they sometimes saw me speed walking those huge lines of carts up into the building.
They're like, are you
I
okay?
didn't care, though. If my life was really on the line, I'd rather be embarrassed than dead, you
Uh-huh.
know? A full week into this new job, I began to notice something strange.
What?
In one of the middle rows in the parking lot, right under one of those
Is there a
tall
car?
light poles in the same spot every night, there was this tan Oldsmobile sedan. This old car would be
Huh?
there at the start of my shift and throughout my day. It would be there every night.
Whoa.
The windows
creepy.
were tinted to the point you could only see the outline of things inside. But I knew someone was in there. I could see their silhouette. Sometimes I would see them move. Now, I wasn't just standing there looking at this old car, but it was near a very frequented cart corral, so I took my glances. Whenever I would leave work or arrive to work, I would begin checking that parking spot. Lo and behold, the car was not there before and after my shift, only during.
Ooh.
So sure enough, I asked my coworkers about it. I thought maybe it was one of their cars that they parked in the middle of the lot,
Yeah.
instead of the side lot like the rest of the employees. Or maybe it was a relative of one of the employees, awaiting their shift to be over to pick them up. But nobody claimed this vehicle, and one of them even admitted to seeing it as well.
Okay, that's
He
creepy.
said to me that he never saw this car there before, up until I started working for them.
Oh, great.
It
Now
was
you have a
beginning
stalker.
to make me feel nervous. Never did I see someone enter or leave that vehicle. The door never opened. I never even saw the vehicle move.
I think they're stalking
I would
you, dude.
arrive and it wouldn't be there. Then I'd clock in and head out to the lot, and there it would be. As if the person inside was waiting on me. I was starting to
darn.
get fed up. I had enough on my plate to deal with. I did not need this in my life. So
Yeah,
I
you
took
need a
advantage
stalker.
of my employment there and walked up to the car. I would pretend to be interested in seeing if this person needed some help. I would put on a fake friendly smile and ask if something was wrong.
They're gonna.
That
put
would
a
be
gun
the
on
end
you.
of that. I would finally have some answers. Or so I thought. When I walked up to the window of the car that night, my heart felt like it was going to stop. It felt like the air around me got colder.
Yeah.
My body
don't do
seemed
it.
to be telling me that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life.
Don't do it.
But I forged on. I walked up to the driver's door and
Too
I
much
knocked on
determination,
their
dude.
window. From that close, I could very plainly see that there was a person inside. Someone right behind the wheel. I saw faint, natural movement. The way a living human body can't be absolutely still unless they're dead. But
Oh,
whoever it
right.
was, they did not react to me knocking. They never lowered the window or opened the door. They never flinched. And that's when I started to back away.
Yeah, nope.
I did not take my eyes off of this car.
Nope.
I backed up slowly until the view of that car was overtaken by the other cars in the parking lot, what few there were.
Nope.
Then I turned and jogged inside the building,
Yep, run.
picking up loose ads from the carts in the bay for as long as I possibly could. I did not want to go back out there that night. I began to avoid that spot entirely, even when the morning crew began to complain about that specific cart corral being full when they arrived. One night, after an especially long and cold shift, I had just clocked out and gotten in my car to go home. But before I started my car, I looked in the rearview mirror. My eyes widened in disbelief. That same tan sedan was behind me, right
Tan
behind
sedan.
me in the space adjacent to mine. I have no idea how I didn't notice it while walking toward my car. Maybe I was just tired, but the sight of it made me jump. I remember breathing to myself, what the hell? Hesitantly, I started the car and pulled away. Only a few seconds after my car was in motion, the vehicle behind me came to life. Their headlights flashed on, and they began to follow me.
Great.
Now I was scared. Scared like I never thought I would be. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should floor at home or call the police. No, instead I decided to try to lose this car.
Great.
Before heading in the direction of my parents' house, where I still lived, I went the opposite way. I made way too many turns, yet still that vehicle followed me.
Yep.
It wasn't right up on me, it kept its distance, but it was always there. I was going 20 over the speed limit at some points, trying desperately to get out of sight of this psycho.
And then a police
It took
car.
maybe half an hour, but I finally did it.
Oh, God,
I lost them in the midst of a small suburban neighborhood that I was barely able to navigate out of myself.
Oh, goodness.
Finally, I felt safe enough to drive home. I pulled up into the driveway and parked behind my dad's old truck, and I walked up onto the porch where I found my parents waiting for me. I was late, really late, and they were worried. I explained to them exactly what was going on, that someone had been following me and I wanted to lose them first.
And
their looks of worry only got worse. Before they could question me further, the three of us turned to the driveway. There were headlights coming up from behind the trees down the hill. Someone was approaching, and we weren't expecting any company. Not at that hour. I froze in horror as I watched the tan Oldsmobile pull up in our driveway, bright lights shining onto me and my parents. No one got out of the car. It just stood there.
Get his license.
My parents were in disbelief. I didn't even have to tell them that this was the same vehicle as before. After a minute or two of waiting for someone to exit the car, my dad became exasperated. He stomped over to the car. Something told me to stop him though, but I was petrified, rooted to the spot. Luckily, before he ever reached the vehicle, they just backed up and pulled out of the driveway. Dad walked back over to us, saying that he tried to get the license plate number, but their tag lights were out.
Great.
I was scared before, but by then I was disturbed. Whoever this was, they were obviously after me. That was certain. And now, despite all my efforts, they knew exactly where I lived. I was helpless. That night, I lost the feeling of safety that home affords you. And that, my friends, is one of the worst feelings imaginable. After that, my dad began picking me up from work himself. I did not want to be alone, not even on the drive home. At work, I did not leave the side of my coworkers, even if it annoyed them. At the end of my shift, Dad would be outside in his truck waiting right at the front doors, so there was no need to worry about going out alone in that parking lot. I didn't see that car for a while. And for a moment, I was beginning to think it was all over.
That's cute.
I was dead wrong. One night, my shift ended as usual, and I was walking out of the doors heading towards my dad's truck. He was just outside waiting on me. I could see him. He was maybe a distance of 10 yards from the doors to his truck. Just 10 yards of sidewalk and curb. I really thought there was nothing to worry about. Halfway to his passenger door, lights to my left blinded me. Instantly, I turned in their direction, trying to make out what was going on. Who was there? Whoever it was had their brights on. Before I could even think of anything else, the car burned rubber, and it raced towards me. It was simply too close. I didn't have the chance to react. Before I knew it, I was barreling over the hood of the vehicle. I landed hard on the concrete, all the breath forced out of my lungs. I watched this car race away from the parking lot, and soon my dad was over me. I had never seen him so afraid. It took several minutes for my mind to clear, and when it did, I quickly looked over my body. I was terrified that I would find my leg twisted and mangled, or a body part missing. But I was fine. I felt fine. Somehow, I was uninjured. Despite this, my father called an ambulance, as well as the police.
Good point.
And that was it. The police got a hold of the footage of the cameras outside of the Walmart building.
I hope so.
They could not get a plate number either.
He thinks you're dead.
It was dark,
Good.
The cameras were cheap, and the vehicle's tag lights were out. All we had was a color and make of the vehicle. Yet, nothing came of it. No one was found or arrested. And soon after that, I lost my job due to Walmart's somewhat delayed policy in hiring felons. But by then,
Okay.
honestly, I didn't care. I didn't want to work there anymore.
God, that bitch isn't coming
I
back though.
couldn't survive another night. Probably literally. I don't know what to say to those of you hearing this story. There is no moral. I could
What
say
moral?
be careful,
This
but
isn't
this
a moral,
could
this is a
happen to
story.
anybody.
This is like
No matter
actual
how
thing.
prepared you are, this could happen to you. I thought I did everything right. Even still, after all the precautions I took, some stranger behind a wheel and tinted windows drove over the curb, aiming at me. I'm lucky I escaped with my life.
Was he after you because you're a felon? Because that's contradictory, you murderer.
Number
Or
2.
was he a druggie?
Walmart creep tries to kill me. Submitted by Johann F.
Johan!
I used to work at a Walmart a couple of years back. A lot of unusual and strange things happened to me while I worked there. But this is by far the scariest moment. I'm a 16-year-old male, and I'm quite short standing at about 5'8", but I like to think I could defend myself if I needed to. Back to the story. I was doing a usual shift, working from early to late. The hours weren't great and the pay was terrible, but it was enough for someone my age. This experience started at around 7:30 at night, when the amount of people shopping was beginning to die down.
Okay.
I think at the time there was only about 7 people inside the Walmart, not including the employees, when a man dressed from head to toe in black with a hoodie and sunglasses came in. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He walked up to the register where I was working and asked what time we closed.
Yeah, what time do you
His
close?
breath stank of alcohol and tobacco.
Okay.
10 o'clock, I said.
10? Alright.
Thanks, he muttered under his breath. He then disappeared into one of the aisles. A
Alright.
couple of hours later, I had forgotten about the man entirely. Most of the people working at the time were leaving to go home as the store closed in about half an hour. I had the unfortunate task of locking up the restroom. This meant I was one of 2 of the last people to leave.
Oh,
As I was making
course.
my way over to the restrooms, key in hand, I noticed wet footprints leading to the entrance of one of the stalls. Is there anyone in there? I asked out loud.
me.
I'm locking up now, it's time to go home. We're closing. 1 second,
I'm
said a
shitting.
hoarse voice, followed by a deep cough.
Oh, I was on
The
sick in
stall opened, and out came the man from earlier. I pretended not to remember him, but I did, which made me a bit worried, as I thought he must have been some lunatic or something.
there. Yeah.
It was probably an over-exaggeration at the time, but as it turned out, it may have saved my life in the end. Can you come over here?
No.
There's a problem with the toilet,
No.
the man said.
I can fix it later, dude.
He looked very on edge when he said this, and it made me nervous. I'll check it out when you leave. I just want to make sure I don't lock anyone in here,
Yeah,
I
man.
said
you
with
can
an
go.
insincere giggle.
Don't worry.
No, he replied.
What?
Come check now.
No. Don't
The
tell
way
me
he
what to do.
suddenly
I'll
raised
do what
his
I want.
voice made me uneasy.
I'll do what I
That,
want,
mixed
son.
with the way he looked, it wasn't doing him any justice. Sir, you have to leave now. I was beginning to sound noticeably anxious and agitated.
Yeah.
He
Get out here, I
stared
can
at
do it
me
on my
for a
own.
good 10 seconds, and then vacated the restroom
Yeah,
finally.
take out.
On the way out, he bumped into me as if he were angry at my final decision to not fix the toilet. As he left, I
Too bad,
closed the
son.
door behind him, and I went to inspect the toilet. It was fine, and it worked fine as well.
Oh, well.
He was trying to lure me in there for some reason,
Or he doesn't
I
know
was
how
starting to get
what
paranoid,
a broken toilet looks
which
like.
again may have been me being scared for no reason, yet again. But I couldn't help but feel that something was off about the situation. As I left the bathroom and locked it,
And then
I
you
looked
found a
over
knife.
to the entrance of the store, and
You're
I
still there?
saw that man was just looking at me while standing in between the automatic doors. I froze and I looked back at him. After a few seconds of this death stare,
And then he
he
smiled.
left, and he disappeared into the darkness
Bye,
of the
ho.
night.
You didn't
I
work?
felt relieved, but still very weirded out. I wanted to see what the man was doing in the store for so long, so I made my way over to the security hub so I could see what footage the security cameras had gotten of the man.
Plot twist, he actually
I
was
opened the
thinking shit.
camera archive and went to 2 hours earlier. I scanned over all the different cameras until I finally saw him. He was in the houseware section near the back of the store, pacing up and down the aisles.
Alright.
He was holding something shiny, but I could
Uh-oh.
not tell
Knife
exactly
to
what it
meet you.
was. I forwarded the tape until he decided to leave, which was after an hour of him pacing up and down. He, of course, made his way to the restrooms, and as he entered, he looked around, as if he were
Suspicious.
seeing if anyone was around to watch him.
There's cameras.
And I got a better view of what he was holding. It was a knife.
Oh,
A
knife to
very
meet you.
long combat-style knife. He then went into the restrooms, and about a half an hour later, I came onto the camera as I was locking things up. I can only assume that this man wanted to lure me into the stall to rob me, or maybe even kill me.
Alright.
The other employee that was on that night
you are.
never saw the
You
man,
can
and since then I've quit working there and have never seen that man again.
be a dingus.
And that's probably for the best.
He's a dingus.
Number 3. Walmart Creeper. Submitted by Cody R.
Ugh.
I was 13 years old at the time this happened. Me and 3 other friends wanted to have some fun, because teenagers like us, being the stupid types, wanted to go to Walmart at 10:30.
Oh, 10:30.
Me and my friend
Man,
Hunter,
that is
who was
closed.
17, convinced some girls named Bella and Madison to go to Walmart with us.
Oh, that's why I wanted to know
We
when
proceeded
Walmart
to go
closes,
at this time
so
in
we
a
would know
bad
when
area
closing
of
time
South
is.
Carolina. When we walked in, I didn't feel anything irregular at first, so we went on doing pranks and screwing
Now I
around
get
like
it.
most teenagers. As we were about to jump in one of those big baskets full of the rubber balls, again I was 13, I heard, "Come over here."
Oh, come over here, little
I thought
boy.
it was only me at first, but then I looked over at Hunter and he looked weirded out.
No kidding.
He was the oldest, and he said, "Let's go home and
Yeah,
get some drinks.
let's get outta here.
We'll watch a movie or something.
Let's get outta
just
here."
get out of here." For the first time, he looked scared, which in turn made me nervous, and the girls got frightened too. The whole situation was weird. As we walked to the food aisles, I saw this person. He was hooded in all black, and he was very pale. That must have been the guy who said that earlier. So I told Hunter that that creepy dude who had said that was behind us. We went into the snacks and he followed us. So I yelled to him to just screw off, to leave us alone. He looked at us with a very eerie smile, and we went up and down different aisles trying to with us. We proceeded to go at this time in a bad area of South Carolina.
I
When
never
we walked
submitted.
in, I didn't feel
Heck with that
anything
noise.
irregular at first.
Heck with waiting.
So we went on doing pranks and screwing around like most teenagers. As we were about to jump in one of those big baskets full of the rubber balls, again I was 13, I heard,
I was
"Come over
13.
here."
Don't judge me for my
I thought it was only me at
ball
first,
pit
but
addiction.
then I looked over at Hunter and he
Dude,
looked
no judgment.
weirded
Those are
out.
great.
He was the oldest, and he said, "Let's go home and get
Nope.
some drinks. We'll watch a movie or something.
Yes,
Let's just get out
Just
of here."
anything. I just don't want to deal
For
with
the
this.
first time, he looked scared,
Yeah.
which in turn
Wouldn't
made
you?
me nervous, and the girls got frightened too.
Who would want some person to
whole
say, "Come
situation
here"?
was
No,
weird.
thank you.
As we walked to the food aisles, I saw this person. He was hooded in all black,
Okay,
and he
more
was very
suspicious.
pale. That must have been the guy who said that earlier.
Nosferatu.
So I told Hunter that that creepy dude who had said that was behind us. We went into the
He's coming.
snacks and he followed us. So I yelled to him to just screw off, to leave us alone.
Sir, please.
He looked at us with a very eerie smile, and we went up and down different aisles trying to lose the
Stop
guy.
coming at us.
When he was gone, Madison had to use the restroom. We were dumb and young, and we let her
Let
go
her
in
do
alone.
it. Ah!
And to this day, I regret letting her go in that Walmart bathroom by herself.
Oh, she got
The
raped,
three of
did
us
she?
stood around waiting for her, just looking at
Or
different
kidnapped?
items on the shelves around us. When we heard a scream, and all our faces went white.
Okay.
It came from the
Storm
bathroom
the
that Madison
bathroom.
was in, and that was Madison's voice. I did what anyone would do, and I ran
Ran
inside.
at it.
It was that same hooded man.
Beat the shit out of
He
him.
had her at the corner, pinned against the wall.
Okay,
there
that's
were
it.
tears streaming down her face,
Kick her.
and I could
Kick
hear this
him.
freak laughing. I didn't have time to think.
Kick him in the
I
leg.
just ran at the guy and pushed him. Then I grabbed Madison by the hand,
Kick
and
him in
all
the
of us
leg.
ran out of that
Break his
store.
joints.
Not once did we look behind us to see if we were being chased. We just needed
I'm
to
just
get the
kidding,
heck
don't worry.
out of there. To this day, I don't know what was wrong with that guy. We don't know who he was or where he is now. But I do know that ever since that day, Madison is a bit more quiet, a bit more cautious,
Oh, the heck?
and a lot less trusting of other people. Number 4. The Walmart Freak. Submitted by Mama Bear.
Mama bear.
First off, I'll tell you that I'm a 22-year-old woman. I'm a mother of 2 young children, and I was out shopping late one evening around 8:30, maybe even 9 p.m. My husband didn't join us due to the fact that he was working late that night,
More.
and I did not like going places by myself with my daughters, so I asked my best friend, let's call her Macy, to tag along. I was placing my 2 girls in their booster seats and buckling them in. Then we headed on over to Macy's house. We got to our destination and parked. I
Okay,
grabbed
I
the
thought that was gonna
double-seated
miss.
stroller out of the back while Macy helped the girls get out of the car. While I was bent down in the trunk, I noticed a tall, shadowed figure standing kind of close to my car. It was dark, and the way that the parking lot lights were reflecting, it was kind of hard to tell how close the figure was, but undoubtedly there was someone there. I had finally lugged the heavy two-seated stroller out of the trunk, and Macy and I placed the girls inside and strapped the buckles on them. As we walked to the front entrance, I could see out of the corner of my eye that shadow of a person was still lurking, but moving.
Great.
I could see the legs moving as if they were walking. I turned my head as slightly as I could to the right to see if it was just another person walking to the store. But I didn't see anyone, so I just blew it off. There were a lot of workers outside standing in the outdoor smoking area,
Right.
so I thought to myself that it could easily have been one of them. We walked into the Walmart, and I had dropped my phone off of the stroller,
Right.
so I bent over to pick it up, when I realized a few feet behind me there was someone standing there. I looked back as I was standing back up, and there was a man. He was about 6'3", just standing there right behind
6'3".
me.
Wow, that's tall.
I'm only 5'4".
Wow.
I
Me
wasn't
too.
really freaked out by
I'm
this,
5'4"
thinking
too.
it was just
That's
another shopper.
tall.
They probably just stopped because I was blocking the entrance. I said, "I'm sorry," and I started walking. "Hey, wait," I heard from a deep yet soft-toned voice.
Ooh.
I turned to the voice,
Hi.
and Macy turned as well.
What do you want?
It was the man that was standing behind me at the door. Macy and I were about 10 feet in front of him. So he walks towards us, and he's staring dead into my eyes. When he got close to us, he looked at me and said, "My God, you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen."
Thank you.
I didn't think much of this. I was mostly taken by surprise. So I just said, "Thank you." Macy and I just kind of stood there waiting for the man to say something. He was tall, clean-cut, and dressed well, almost as if he worked in an office of some sort. But he didn't say anything, and he just continued to stare dead into my eyes, as if he was trying to eat my soul or something.
Okay.
We began to walk away, heading for the baby section. I was 6.5 months pregnant at the time.
What?
We noticed pretty soon that wherever Macy and I went, that
How old are
man
you?
followed, even into the feminine aisle where men don't tend to go. I was
he's
more
already
than just
creepy
a
for
little
you, that's
freaked
not
out.
surprising.
I looked at Macy and I told her I was feeling uncomfortable with this man following us.
Well, no crap.
She's a bit of an optimist and said that maybe he was just looking around. So I tried
After
to
saying you have
rationalize my
beautiful eyes,
thoughts and
I don't know
said,
about that.
"Okay." Macy, my kids, and I just kept going on with our shopping because it was getting late and the girls were starting to get fussy. We got into a checkout line, and I realized then that I forgot something that I was going to get for my husband. It was something he usually forgot to get for himself when he was out. I was going to get him some shaving gel. I'm not sure if all Walmarts are this way, but where the checkout lines are, the health and beauty department are pretty far away from each other. I had finally made it there, and keep in mind that when you're in mid to late pregnancy, your feet and legs hurt all the time. I just about jumped out of my skin when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to see who it was, and it was the man from before. I didn't know whether to feel angry or nervous.
Awkward.
I asked what he wanted, and he said to me, and I quote,
Go Bob.
"You. I want you."
I knew it!
I was more than dumbfounded about this. "What?"
That ass.
I said in a shaky voice.
Oops.
"Yes, miss, I want you. You're beautiful, you smell nice,
Ew,
and you're pregnant."
He's smelling.
I don't
Oh!
want to sound bad, but I get really turned on when I see pregnant women.
Oh!
I looked at him in disbelief.
That's even
And
worse!
I was pissed. "I'm married, and that's a little disrespectful," I said with a straight face. This must have made him mad. He was
Gross.
obviously indignant. His voice steadily grew louder. "No, I want you, and I'm not going to let you say no."
Oh my god!
I'm not
Run!
one that likes to
Run,
argue,
run!
so I just turned and started walking towards the end of the aisle.
Run!
And that's when I felt a tug on my ponytail. I felt my neck pull back violently. I'm not much of a fighter. I was raised not to be. But something in me clicked. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones. But I got more than pissed. I screamed for him to let go. He tried to put me in a chokehold, and I know people could hear me. I was yelling, kicking, and screaming. Then he put his hand over my mouth. "Shut up, or I'll break your neck." I continued to kick as much as I
Scream!
could, kicking shelves and knocking things off to get someone's
Unless you're a
attention.
necrophiliac, I'm not gonna
After
do
what
that.
felt like an hour, I heard a guy yell, "Let her go!" And he did.
Thanks, friend.
And the guy ran. Macy must have heard or seen something, and she was rushing with the girls over to my side. I fell to the ground, trying to catch my breath. I started crying so bad to the point that I couldn't even see. Macy called the police, and when they arrived, I told them everything. To this day, I'll never go out alone to get something. I never go to the store without my husband. This man was never caught, and I have no idea what he would have done to me if someone didn't tell him to let go. I was worried
Good
for my
choice,
unborn
apparently.
child's safety, and my child is doing just fine, by the way.
Good.
Let's just say I now go to another Walmart, but still
Yeah.
I never to this day go out alone.
Oh, it's almost. Let's try to get at least
Number
8.
5. Potential Kidnapper. Submitted by Jade. Before I tell this story, I have to mention a very important life lesson that
Now
helps
there's
me
8.
all the time. Always trust
Get
your gut
1050.
instinct. Always. Now, on with the story.
1,500.
I was about 16 at the time, and my nephew's first birthday was coming up. So I decided to go to Walmart to pick up a toy for cheap. Yeah, Auntie of the Year, right?
Not
Well,
really.
as I was going up and down the toy aisle,
Look at
I
all
saw a
that.
little girl about 5 years old, looking at the Barbie toys.
Okay.
I was looking for toys for younger boys, so I went to turn and walk away. But that's when I saw that this little girl was not alone.
Yeah.
A man had appeared from the other end of the aisle. I stepped back, then forward. This man must not
Maybe
have been
that's
related to her.
her dad?
She didn't seem to acknowledge him in any way. But the way he was just lingering there,
Okay, that's
looking at
creepy.
her, made me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's
The
creepy.
little girl did not look up from her toys, and I didn't see anyone nearby to help me in case I had to fight off a possible kidnapping. Maybe I was a bit too paranoid too
What's
quickly.
he, what are you dodging for?
Still, I pretended to browse the toys just in case, meanwhile taking in every detail of this guy. Dark jean pants, dirty green coat,
Thief.
skinny build, and he wasn't that tall, no more than 5'3".